Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in the familiar of Zero and got married to Louise, Siesta, and Tabitha? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Gandalfer of the Void. The sun over the village of Tarbes was a warm, familiar weight. It baked the dust on the single road that wound through the collection of timber and plaster houses, and it coaxed the sweet, earthy scent from the fields of ripening grain that stretched to the edge of the whispering woods. For the people of Tarbes, it was a day like any other, a day of hard work, simple meals, and the quiet comfort of knowing your world ended at the forest's edge and began again at the river bend. For Naruto, it was a day of restless energy. He stood atop the tallest oak at the village perimeter, a perch no other soul in Tarbes could reach, his feet planted on a branch no thicker than his arm. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around him, carrying the sounds of the village. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a smith's hammer, the distant laughter of children chasing chickens, the low murmur of conversation. He could see it all. Old Man Hemlock, his back bent like a question mark, guiding his plow ox. A group of women gathered at the communal well, their gossip a faint, cheerful buzz. His life was here. He was an orphan, found as a babe on the doorstep of the village elder, Father Michel, with nothing but a swaddling cloth and a name that felt strange on the tongue. He had grown up with the village as his family, its people his aunts and uncles, its children his siblings. They loved him. They also feared him, just a little. They called it Naruto's knack. The knack for being in two places at once when a roof needed mending. The knack for appearing from thin air to catch a child before they tumbled into the river. The knack for hauling logs that should have taken 3 grown men, his muscles straining but never failing. He was faster, stronger, and more aware than anyone they had ever known. He could vanish into the woods and return with a week's worth of game in an hour. They had long since stopped questioning it. It was simply a fact of their lives, as real as the sun and the soil. That's just Naruto, they would say with a shrug and a fond shake of their heads. He didn't know how he did it. The knowledge was a dream memory, a half-forgotten song humming in his blood. He knew, with an instinct deeper than thought, how to pull on a warmth that coiled in his gut. He could shape it, push it to his feet to leap impossible heights, or spread it through his senses until he could feel the flutter of a rabbit's heart 100 paces away. The word for it hovered on the edge of his mind, tantalizingly close, chakra. It felt right. A sudden show, oot from the fields below broke his reverie. Whoa, easy now. Hold her steady. Naruto's eyes snapped to the source. A heavy cart, piled high with sacks of harvested wheat, was tilting precariously. One of its wooden wheels had splintered in a deep rut, and the ox tethered to it was panicking, threatening to tip the entire load. 2 farmers strained against the cart's side, their faces red with effort, their boots slipping in the soft dirt. With a sigh that was part exasperation, part amusement, Naruto pushed off the branch. He didn't climb down. He fell, twisting in midair, his body a lure of orange and black against the blue sky. He landed in a silent crouch behind a thicket of bushes at the edge of the field, unseen. In the same motion, he brought his hands together in a simple, Ross-fingered sign that felt as natural as breathing. Poof! A soft plume of white smoke erupted beside him. When it cleared, a second Naruto stood there, an identical copy down to the scuff on his fair boots and the determined glint in his blue eyes. They shared a look, a perfect, unspoken understanding passing between them. The copy nodded and blurred into motion, a flicker of speed too fast for a normal eye to track. He appeared at the front of the cart, his hand landing gently on the panicked ox's snout. Easy there, big fella, he murmured, his voice calm and reassuring. The massive animal's panicked bellows quieted to a low, rumbling snort. Its wild eyes softened, soothed by the sheer force of his calm. Simultaneously, the original Naruto strode out from behind the bushes. Having some trouble, Jean? He called out, a grin spreading across his face. The 2 farmers startled. Naruto, by the founder, where did you come from? Jean gasped, his arms trembling with strain. Give us a hand, lad. The axle's about to snap. Quote, Don't worry about the axle, Naruto said, waving a dismissive hand. He walked to the tilting side of the cart, planted his feet, and bent his knees. Just get ready to pull it clear. Jean and his companion exchanged a look of disbelief. Lad, this weighs a ton. You can't. Naruto didn't answer. He just pushed. His muscles bunched, the strange energy in his core flaring to life. With a groan of protesting wood and a collective gasp from the farmers, the cart began to rise. It straightened, tons of grain and timber lifting as if by a giant's hand. The splintered wheel came free of the rut. Now, Naruto grunted, his voice tight with effort. Snapping out of their stupor, the farmers and the now calm ox pulled. The cart lurched forward onto solid ground. Naruto held it steady for another moment before lowering it with a heavy thump. He clapped the dust from his hands, the grin returning to his face. Up by the ox, his duplicate gave a thumbs up and dispersed in another quiet puff of smoke. Jean stared from the cart, to the empty space where the second Naruto had been, and back to the real one, his mouth hanging open. Every time, he muttered, shaking his head. Every single time, and I still don't believe it. Naruto just laughed, a bright, honest sound that echoed across the field. He felt a familiar pang, a hollowness that even the warmth of the village couldn't quite fill. He was loved, but he was other. He was a piece of a puzzle that didn't belong in this box, and some days, the waiting, for what, he didn't know, was a physical ache. He was about to offer to fix the wheel when the world dissolved into a sickening vortex of green. It wasn't a light, it was a presence. A howling, tearing void that erupted from nowhere and everywhere at once. The sky vanished. The ground disappeared. The sounds of the village were replaced by a deafening roar, like a waterfall made of screaming souls. He felt a physical, irresistible pull, as a hook had been lodged in his very essence and was yanking him through the fabric of reality. His instincts screamed. He dug his heels into the non-existent ground, fighting back, his chakra flaring defensively around him. But it was like trying to punch the ocean. Anger, hot and sharp, surged through him. He was being taken, abducted, ripped away from his home. The world snapped back into focus with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled, his senses reeling, the smell of burnt ozone and strange, sweet flowers filling his lungs. He was standing in a stone courtyard, surrounded by a circle of wide-eyed teenagers dressed in strange black uniforms. They looked like crows, startled from a feast. Before him, on her knees, was a small, pink-haired girl, her face pale with shock. In her hand, she clutched a slender wooden stick. The air around her practically vibrated with a chaotic, untamed energy. Silence. A thick, profound silence hung over the courtyard, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Dozens of eyes were locked on him, a mixture of fear, confusion, and derision in their gazes. Naruto's own gaze, however, was fixed on the girl. His senses, still screaming from the violent transition, pinpointed her as the source, the epicenter, the one who had pulled him. His anger, which had been a wild, formless thing, now had a target. His blue eyes, normally as bright and open as the Tarb's sky, narrowed into icy slits. You, he growled, the single word cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. What did you do? The pink-haired girl flinched. She scrambled to her feet, trying to gather a shred of dignity. She puffed out her chest, a comical gesture on her small frame, and pointed her stick at him. Silence. You should be on your knees, thanking me for the honor of being summoned. Her voice was high-pitched and shaky, betraying the bravado. I am Louise Françoise Leblanc de Lavalière. You are my familiar, and you will show me the proper respect. Naruto stared at her. Familiar. Summoned. The words meant nothing to him. All he knew was that one moment he was home, and the next he was here, thanks to her. I don't know who you are, he said, his voice dangerously low. And I don't care. You kidnapped me. Send me back, now. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd of students. A commoner. She really did it. She summoned a peasant. Zero Louis. He finally summoned something, and it can talk back. Louise's face flushed a furious, blotchy red, a battle between humiliation and rage. I cannot. The springtime summoning ritual is sacred. The bond is permanent. Now, seal the contract. Kiss my hand and be done with it. Kiss your. Naruto started, his disbelief warring with his fury. He took a step forward, his presence radiating an almost physical pressure. The students nearest to him instinctively took a step back. You drag me from my home, call me your pet, and now you want me to kiss you. Are all nobles this crazy? How dare you? She shrieked, her control finally snapping. You are a commoner. I am a noble. Your station is to obey. Before Naruto could respond, a searing pain erupted on the back of his left hand. He cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound, and staggered back, clutching his hand. It felt like a hot iron was being pressed into his skin, burning not just flesh, but something deeper. He looked down. Glowing lines of ethereal fire were etching themselves into his skin, forming a pattern of strange, angular runes. G-A-N-D-A-L-F-R. The letters burned with a blinding white light before fading, leaving behind a stark black tattoo that seemed to suck the very light from the air. The pain subsided, but a new sensation replaced it. A connection. A chain, forged of magic and will, linking him to the furious pink-haired girl before him. And through that chain, he felt something else. He felt her raging pride, her bone-deep insecurity, the crushing weight of her failures. But beneath all of that, he felt the source of her power. It was an emptiness, a vast, hungry, terrifying void. It was the same abyss that had torn him from his world, and now, a piece of it was branded on his skin, a permanent link to its wielder. The experience was unpleasant. There, a man with glasses and a weary expression, a professor, Naruto guessed, said, his voice filled with a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The contract is sealed. Mademoiselle de la Valliere, you have successfully summoned a familiar. The success felt very much like a failure. Louise stared at Naruto, who was glaring at the new mark on his hand with murderous intent. This was not the grand, powerful beast she had dreamed of. This was not a dragon, or a manticore, or even a magical talking mole. It was a commoner, a loud, disrespectful, infuriatingly handsome commoner who was looking at her like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. This is a disaster, she whispered, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The crowd of students, their initial shock wearing off, began to snicker. A tall, blond boy with an air of theatrical arrogance stepped forward, a red rose held delicately in his fingers. My, Louise the Zero. I must say, you've outdone yourself. Not only is he a commoner, but a thoroughly ill-mannered one at that. A perfect match. This was Gouche de Gramont, a self-proclaimed master of Roman CE and a constant thorn in Louise's side. He turned his condescending gaze on Naruto. You there, peasant. You have offended the honor of your new master. As a gentleman, I cannot allow this. I challenge you to a duel. Louise's head snapped up. Gouche. No, a duel, Naruto repeated, his attention shifting to the blonde peacock. The simmering anger in his chest found a new, more satisfying target. This pompous idiot was everything he hated about the nobles he'd only ever heard stories about. Arrogant, entitled, and convinced of his own superiority. Gouche smirked, flourishing his rosé. Of course, a duel of honor, to teach you your proper place in this world. Naruto's lips pulled back in a sharp, predatory grin that held no humor at all. An idea, cold and clear, formed in his mind. He was trapped here, bound to the angry midget who was currently staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. He couldn't go home. He was surrounded by arrogant nobles who saw him as less than human. Fine, if he was stuck here, he would set the rules. And the first rule was that no one looked down on Naruto Uzumaki. All right, Naruto said, his voice ringing with sudden confidence. The students, who had expected him to beg or flee, fell silent. I accept your duel. He pointed a thumb at himself. I'm Naruto, and I'm not going to learn my place. I'm going to teach you yours. A gasp went through the crowd. Gouche's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Bold words for a commoner with no magic. Who needs magic? Naruto said, cracking his knuckles. The sound was like a pistol shot in the tense air. From the edge of the courtyard, hidden behind a stone pillar, a young maid with chestnut hair and kind, brown eyes watched the scene unfold. Her name was Siesta, and she had paused in her duties, drawn by the commotion. She had seen nobles duel before. They were flashy, arrogant displays of power. But this was different. She looked at the blonde boy, Naruto, and she didn't see a commoner. He saw a confidence that bordered on absolute, a strength that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. And when he smiled that dangerous smile, her heart gave a strange, unexpected flutter. The duel was set for the Arena of Honor, a circular pit adjacent to the main courtyard. Professor Colbert acted as the officiator, his face a mask of worried resignation. The entire student body had gathered, eager for the spectacle of Louise's peasant familiar being put in his place. Gush stood on one side of the arena, his wand, a delicate rod adorned with a sculpted rose, held aloft. "Prepare to be dazzled by the beauty of my bronze Valkyries, peasant," he declared, his voice echoing theatrically. "Let this be a lesson in the gulf that separates the likes of you from the likes of us." Naruto stood opposite him, hands in his pockets, looking utterly unimpressed. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the strange, thrumming energy of this world's magic in the air. It felt sluggish, heavy, wading through molasses compared to the light, fluid feel of his own chakra. "Whenever you're ready, flower boy," Naruto called out, his casual tone a stark contrast to Gush's grandstanding. Gush's face tightened. "Insolent cur, for the honor of the Gramont name. Summon Valkyrie." He swung his wand. The ground in front of him glowed, and 6 patches of dirt and stone began to churn. They rose up, shaping themselves into the forms of armored female warriors, each wielding a spear and shield. They were made of solid bronze, gleaming under the afternoon sun. The students oohed and awed in appreciation. Louise wrung her hands, her heart pounding. Gush's Valkyries were his signature spell. They were strong, durable, and he could command all 6 at once. A single, unarmed commoner stood no chance. "Naruto, run!" she cried out, her pride forgotten in a surge of genuine fear for him. Naruto didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the 6 bronze statues taking menacing steps towards him. A slow smile spread across his face. This was perfect. "All right," he said to himself, his voice a low murmur. "Let's see what they think of this." He dropped his hands from his pockets and brought them together in that same simple cross-fingered sign. Poof! The students gasped. In a puff of white smoke that seemed to appear from nowhere, a second Naruto materialized beside the first. The copy stretched his arms over his head, mirroring the original's relaxed posture. "Took you long enough," the clone grumbled. "I was getting bored." "Just handle the dolls," the real Naruto said, not taking his eyes off Gush. The clone grinned. "You got it, boss." No one knew how to react. 2 of them. How? Was it an illusion? A speed trick? Gush, for his part, was momentarily stunned. "What is this sorcery?" "My turn," Naruto said. He didn't wait for an answer. As Gush commanded his Valkyries to charge, Naruto's clone moved. He wasn't a blur of speed this time. He just took 3 long, loping strides forward, meeting the charge of the 6 bronze statues head-on. The students braced for the impact, expecting the clone to be smashed to pieces. What happened was far stranger. The clone didn't try to fight them. It simply intercepted them. With an almost lazy grace, it weaved between the charging golems. A hand shot out, redirecting a spear thrust into the ground. A foot hooked around an ankle, sending one Valkyrie stumbling into another. 2 more swung their spears, and the clone simply ducked under them, catching the bronze hafts in his hands and holding them fast. In seconds, the terrifying charge of 6 bronze Valkyries was reduced to a tangled, clumsy mess, completely neutralized by a single, grinning duplicate. The crowd was silent, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. But they had made a critical mistake. They were all watching the clone. While their attention was diverted, the real Naruto had moved. He hadn't bothered with speed. He just walked, a calm, deliberate pace, closing the distance to Gush, who was still staring in open-mouthed shock at his neutralized Valkyries. By the time Gush realized his mistake, it was too late. Naruto was right in front of him, his shadow falling over the nobleman. Gush's eyes widened in panic. He tried to bring his wand up, to cast another spell, to do something. Naruto's fist shot out. There was no flash of light, no incantation. Just the raw, undeniable sound of knuckles connecting with a jaw. It wasn't a world-ending punch, not even close. It was a short, Sharp, perfectly delivered strike. A lesson. Gusha's eyes rolled back in his head. The rose fell from his limp fingers. He crumpled to the ground in a heap, out cold before he even hit the dirt. The clone, seeing the job was done, gave a lazy wave and dispersed in a final puff of smoke. Silence. The only sound in the arena was the gentle breeze, blowing the fallen rose across the stone floor until it came to rest beside Naruto's boot. He looked down at the unconscious noble, then up at the sea of stunned, silent faces staring back at him. He had their attention now. He turned his gaze to Louise. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, utter shock, stark terror, and a tiny, undeniable flicker of something else. Something that looked almost like awe. Naruto walked over to the edge of the arena, effortlessly leaping over the barrier wall. He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. The magical bond between them tingled, and through it, he could feel her racing heart, her jumbled thoughts. She was afraid of him. Good. Fear was a start. It was better than arrogance. So, he said, his voice calm, breaking the spell that had fallen over the courtyard. You're my master, huh? Louise couldn't find her voice. She could only nod, a tiny, jerky movement. Her entire world, her understanding of power, of nobility, of the sacred art of magic, had been shattered in the span of 5 minutes by an orange-clad commoner with a knuckle-duster's grin and tricks she couldn't begin to comprehend. He looked down at the black runes on his hand, then back at her. A weary sigh escaped his lips. This was his life now. Trapped in a world that wasn't his, bound to a girl who feared him, and surrounded by enemies he'd already started to make. He felt the void again, that thrumming emptiness echoing through the Gandalfur rune. A hungry abyss that seemed to whisper promises of devastating power from Louise's soul. He had a feeling that a pretty boy noble with bronze dolls was going to be the least of his problems. Fine, he said, more to himself than to her. This is going to be a pain. Louise stared up at him, at this impossible boy who was her familiar, her failure, and her terrifying protector. A single, whispered question escaped her lips. What are you? Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers in the royal court. The silence in Louise's room was a living thing. It was a thick, uncomfortable blanket woven from threads of fear, resentment, and a bewildering new reality. Dawn had broken hours ago, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gold, but inside the stone-walled chamber, a standoff was in progress. Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor, his back against the wall, arms folded. He hadn't moved for an hour. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and even, but he was far from asleep. He was listening. He was feeling. The academy around him was a hive of frantic energy. Every conversation, every hushed whisper that drifted through the open window, was about him. The Zero's familiar. A commoner who beat a noble. What is he? The speculation was a low, constant hum, a background noise to the louder, more immediate problem sitting on the bed. Louise sat stiffly on the edge of her mattress. Her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in her lap. She hadn't slept. How could she? The creature, the man, she had summoned was an impossibility. He had defied a noble, accepted a duel, and won. He had won not with magic, which would have been heretical but understandable, but with a casual, almost insulting display of physical prowess and some kind of bizarre cloning trick that had no place in the known magical arts. He was now her familiar, bound to her by the sacred runes, and he was currently treating her existence with the same level of interest one might afford a piece of furniture. He hadn't even accepted the bed she'd begrudgingly offered him. He'd simply taken a spare blanket, rolled it into a pillow, and declared the floor was fine. The act felt less like humility. Why and more like a rejection of her authority, another subtle way of reminding her that he was not playing by her rules. You have to eat something, she said, the words breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was tight. Naruto's eyes opened. They were a startlingly clear blue. I'm fine. No, you're not. Familiars need to be fed. It's the master's duty to provide sustenance, she recited, as if reading from a textbook. It was a pathetic attempt to reassert the proper order of things. A corner of his mouth twitched. You dragged me away from my breakfast yesterday. I can go a while without food. Don't worry your little noble head about it. The casual dismissal stung more than any shout would have. I am your master. It is your place to accept what I provide. And it's your place to not kidnap people, he shot back. His voice still level, but with a new, hard edge to it. Looks like we're both falling down on the job. So how about you stop trying to give me orders, and I'll stop thinking about how to tie you to that chair and find someone who can actually send me home. Louise gasped, her face paling. He wouldn't. He couldn't. And yet, the look in his eyes held no doubt. He absolutely would. The Gandalfur rune on his hand was supposed to ensure loyalty, obedience. But his will felt like a mountain, and the magical compulsion felt like a gentle breeze blowing against it. It was there, a faint whisper in his mind urging him to comply, but it was easily, utterly ignored. A soft knock at the door saved them from further escalation. Before Louise could answer, the door creaked open, and a young maid with gentle brown eyes entered, balancing a tray. It was Siesta. She curtsied low, her eyes flicking nervously from the fuming Louise to the impassive Naruto on the floor. "My apologies, Mademoiselle Valliere," she said, her voice soft and melodic. I heard there was a new familiar. I brought some bread and cheese. And some water." Louise opened her mouth to berate the maid for her impertinence. But the scent of fresh bread filled the room, and her stomach gave a traitorous growl. She snapped her mouth shut, her cheeks burning. Siesta, either not noticing or politely ignoring it, knelt down and placed the tray on the floor in front of Naruto. It was a simple, unspoken act of kindness. She wasn't addressing the familiar. She was offering food to a person who looked hungry. Naruto's expression softened. He looked at the maid, at her worn but clean uniform, the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her nervousness, and the genuine concern in her eyes. She wasn't looking at him like a curiosity or a monster. She was looking at him like a man. "Thanks," he said, the single word imbued with a warmth that had been absent from his voice all morning. He picked up a piece of bread. "I'm Naruto, Siesta," she replied, a small, shy smile gracing her lips. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sir Naruto." "Just Naruto is fine," he said, taking a bite. The bread was coarse but fresh. It tasted like food. Real, honest food. He suddenly realized how hungry he was. Louise watched the exchange, a strange and unpleasant emotion twisting in her gut. Jealousy. It was absurd. Why would she be jealous of a common maid speaking to her insubordinate familiar? But the ease between them, the simple human connection that she had so spectacularly failed to establish, was a stark reminder of the chasm that separated them. The moment was interrupted by the thunderous arrival of another presence. A booming knock rattled the door in its frame. "Mademoiselle de la Valliere, a message from the crown." The door was pushed open to reveal a royal herald, clad in the blue and gold livery of Tristan's royal family. He held a sealed scroll, his expression stern and official. The entire academy seemed to have fallen silent, the ambient hum of gossip replaced by an expectant hush. The herald's eyes swept the room, lingering for a moment on Naruto before fixing on Louise. "By order of Her Royal Highness, Princess Henrietta, you and your familiar are summoned to the palace at once." The blood drained from Louise's face. The palace. Princess Henrietta, her childhood friend, the future queen of Tristan. This was it. This was the formal notice of her disgrace. She would be disowned, her family name shamed, all because she had summoned a belligerent peasant who had then assaulted a high-ranking noble. Her legs felt weak. She swayed, and Siesta instinctively reached out to steady her. Naruto, however, merely finished his piece of bread, dusted the crumbs from his hands, and rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. He looked at the herald, then at the terrified Louise. "The palace, huh?" he said, a curious glint in his eye. "Guess I'll get to see if the princess is as crazy as the rest of you." The journey to Tristania was a tense, rattling affair. They traveled in an enclosed carriage, the royal crest emblazoned on its doors affording them a swift, unimpeded path along the main road. Louise sat opposite Naruto, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, her mind a maelstrom of anxieties. She had tried, in a strained and faltering voice, to coach him on proper court etiquette. "You must bow, a deep, proper bow, and you will not speak unless spoken to. You will address the princess as, Your Highness, and nothing else. You will not make any sudden movements. And for the founder's sake, do not mention anything you did yesterday." Naruto had listened with an expression of profound boredom. So, Bo, shut up, and pretend I'm not me. Got it. His sarcasm only frayed her nerves further. He was dressed in a set of spare clothes she had procured from the academy's groundskeeper, plain brown trousers and a black tunic that were a little too tight across his broad shoulders. It was all she could manage on such short notice. He still looked like a commoner, albeit a dangerously fit one. He didn't belong in a royal court. He was a lit fuse. And she was carrying him into a powder keg. As the carriage clattered through the gates of Tristania, Naruto leaned forward, peering out the small window. The capital was a sprawling city of stone and slate, far larger and more densely packed than his village. The sheer number of people was staggering. Nobles in fine clothes rode past in elegant carriages, while merchants shouted their wares and common folk hurried through the crowded streets. The air was thick with 1,000 smells: baking bread, horse manure, perfume, and the ever-present damp stone of the city. It was loud, chaotic, and vibrant. "Big place," was his only comment. The carriage finally rolled to a stop before the Palais de Tristan, a magnificent structure of white marble that seemed to glow in the midday sun. Royal Gua, RDS in polished armor stood ramrod straight, their halberds gleaming. Stepping out of the carriage felt like stepping into another world. The air here was different, quieter, heavier with the weight of power and history. They were led through grand, echoing halls, their footsteps loud on the marble floors. Tapestries depicting heroic battles and stoic founders lined the walls. Nobles in silks and velvets paused to stare as they passed, their expressions a mixture of contempt and morbid curiosity. This was the commoner who had felled Gouche de Gramont. He walked not with a shuffle, but with a confident, rolling gait, his head up. His blue eyes taking in everything with an unnerving intensity. He looked less like a prisoner and more like a predator casing the joint. They were finally ushered into the throne room. It was a vast, sun-drenched chamber with towering stained glass windows. At the far end, upon a simple but elegant throne, sat Princess Henrietta. She was young, with gentle violet eyes and a cascade of brown hair. But she carried herself with a poise that belied her age. Flanking her were ministers and advisors, their faces stern and judgmental. Old man Osmond, the headmaster of the academy, was there too. His expression uncharacteristically grave. Louise's heart hammered against her ribs. She sank into a deep, trembling curtsy. "Your Highness," she breathed. Naruto, beside her, simply gave a short, sharp nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, not deference. A collective, scandalized gasp rippled through the assembled court. Henrietta's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. But she gave no other sign of surprise. Her gaze was fixed on Naruto. "You must be the familiar," she said, her voice clear and calm. "Louise's Zero has certainly produced a unique result. He is untutored, Your Highness," Louise stammered, still halfway to the floor. "I can speak for myself," Naruto said, his voice cutting through her apology. The court stiffened. To speak directly to the princess without being addressed first was an unthinkable breach of protocol. "The name's Naruto, and I'm no one's pet." Henrietta's gaze sharpened. This was not what she had expected. She had a nticipathed, a brutish lout or a terrified peasant. This man was neither. He met her gaze without fear, his posture relaxed but ready, his voice steady and confident. There was a power in him, an energy that had nothing to do with magic, but was no less potent for it. "A bold claim," the princess responded, a hint of steel in her voice. "Yet the runes on your hand say otherwise. You were bound to a noble of Tristan. Your fate is tied to hers, and thus, to this kingdom." "My fate is my own," Naruto replied coolly. "This magic rope you people tied me to is just an inconvenience." The Minister of War, a stout man with a face like a bulldog, stepped forward. "Your Highness, this insolence is intolerable. A commoner cannot be allowed to." "Enough, Minister," Henrietta said, raising a hand. She was intrigued. This, Naruto, was a puzzle. A weapon, perhaps, if he could be aimed. Mademoiselle de la Valliere's duel with Viscount de Gramont has become the talk of the court. "We wish to hear of it. From you." She pointed a regal finger at Naruto. "So," he told them. He didn't embellish or boast. He recounted the events in a flat, factual tone. Gouche had challenged him. He had accepted. He had used a trick. to distract the golems, and then he had punched the Viscount in the face. The blunt, almost dismissive way he described incapacitating a scion of a powerful noble family was more shocking than any bravado could have been. As he spoke, he let his senses drift. The court was a hotbed of emotions, arrogance, fear, ambition. But beneath the surface-level noise, he was listening for anything out of the ordinary. His hearing, honed by years of practice, was far more acute than a normal person's. He let the main conversation fade into the background, focusing instead on the whispers at the room's periphery. Near a large tapestry depicting Founder Brimir, two men stood partially concealed in the shadows. They were dressed in the robes of visiting clerics from Romalia, but they didn't carry the placid air of pilgrims. They radiated a coiled, watchful tension. "The Albion situation is escalating as the pontiff predicted," one whispered, his voice a low hiss. "Reconquista is ready to move. The chaos will be a sufficient screen." "And the artifacts?" the second man asked. "The search continues. We had hopes for the Staff of Destruction, but initial readings suggest it is a disappointing catalyst. Too much of Brimir's taint. We need something older, something from the Founder's era, before he sealed the true powers away." The words snagged in Naruto's mind. Pontiff, Reconquista, Albion, Staff of Destruction, Founder's era. They were pieces of a puzzle he didn't understand, but they felt heavy, important. He filed them away, his expression never changing as he finished his report to the princess. Henrietta was silent for a long moment, studying him. "A trick," she repeated thoughtfully. "A very effective one, it seems." She turned her attention back to a trembling Louise. "Louise, you have summoned a being of unprecedented nature. He is a diplomatic incident waiting to happen." However, her lips curved into a faint, calculating smile. "His unique skills may yet be of service to the crown." Before she could elaborate, a clamor arose from outside the throne room. Shouts, the clang of running armor, and a single, piercing alarm bell that echoed through the palace. Doors to the throne room burst open and a guardsman stumbled in, his face ashen. "Your Highness, the treasury, it's been broken into," he gasped. "Fauke the Earth Crumbler, she's taken the Staff of Destruction." Panic erupted in the court. Ministers shouted, nobles clutched their pearls. The Staff of Destruction was a national treasure, a powerful magical artifact said to have been wielded by Brimir himself. Henrietta stood, her expression hardening. "Seal the palace. Deploy the royal mages." "It's too late, Your Highness," the guard cried. "She's already fled. She crumbled a wall to escape. We have no way to track her." Amidst the chaos, Naruto remained perfectly still. Staff of Destruction, the name from the clerics, whisper. A coincidence? He didn't believe in them. Old man Osmond stepped forward, his eyes finding Naruto in the crowd. "Your Highness," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We may have a way." He looked pointedly at Naruto. "Conventional magical tracking has failed. Perhaps an unconventional approach is needed." Henrietta followed his gaze. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, met Naruto's. An understanding passed between them. She was offering him a chance. A chance to prove he was more than a problem. "Very well," the princess declared, her voice ringing with authority. "Louise de la Valliere, I am charging you and your familiar with a royal task. Retrieve the Staff of Destruction. Succeed, and your family's honor will be restored, and your familiar will be rewarded handsomely. Fail, and your disgrace will be absolute." Louise felt a surge of dizzying hope and terror. This was her chance, her one chance to erase the shame of being the zero. Naruto just crossed his arms. "Reward?" he asked, cutting straight to the point. "I don't want money." The princess blinked. "Then what do you want?" "A map," Naruto said simply. "The most detailed map of this entire continent you have. And information. Everything you know about this, Founder Brimir, and the history of magic." The request was so strange, so academic, that it took the court by surprise. Henrietta stared at him for a beat, then nodded slowly. "A strange price. But if you succeed, it shall be yours. Now go. Every moment you waste, the thief gets further away." The hunt was on. They were given a room in the palace to serve as a base of operations. It was opulent and stuffy, and Naruto hated it instantly. Louise was pacing back and forth, a bundle of frantic energy. "How are we supposed to find her?" She could be anywhere in Tristania by now. She's a master thief, a powerful earth mage. We have nothing. Calm down. You're thinking like a mage, Naruto said, kneeling on the floor and closing his eyes. You're thinking about tracking spells and scrying orbs. I'm thinking about footprints and witnesses. He brought his hands together. Shadow clone jutsu. 10 puffs of smoke filled the room. When they cleared, 10 identical Narutos stood there, grinning at Louise's utterly dumbfounded expression. All right, listen up, the original Naruto barked, pointing at a map of the city they had been given. You two, head to the markets. Ask if anyone saw a woman carrying a big, fancy stick. You two, check the taverns. Bribe people if you have to. You, go to the city gates, see if the guards saw anything unusual. You three, scout the rooftops along the escape path the guards mentioned. Look for disturbed tiles, any trace of her. And you two, he pointed at the last pair, get me some food. I'm starving. The clones all shouted, you got it, boss. In unison, and then, to Louise's complete astonishment, filed out of the room and into the palace, moving with a quiet purpose that was deeply unsettling. What was that? She whispered. Efficiency, Naruto said, opening his eyes. They'll cover the city in an hour. When they disperse, all their memories, everything they saw and heard, will come back to me. Now we just have to wait. He sat back down, leaving low, used to grapple with the casual violation of the laws of physics she had just witnessed. A few minutes later, a soft knock came at the door. It was Siesta, carrying another tray, this one laden with roasted chicken, bread, and a pitcher of juice. Her family worked in the palace kitchens, and she had used her connections. I heard you were given a royal task, Mademoiselle, Sir Naruto, she said, her cheeks slightly flushed. I thought you might need your strength. Naruto's grin was genuine and bright. Siesta, you're a lifesaver. He sat with her by the window while Louise continued to pace, a silent, fuming sentinel. He asked Siesta about her life in the palace, about her family in Tarbes, the same village he was from, a fact that had forged an instant, powerful connection between them. He told her funny, self-deprecating stories about his knack for getting into trouble back home. For the first time since he'd arrived, he wasn't the Gandalfer, or the peasant familiar, or a diplomatic incident. He was just Naruto, sharing a meal with a kind girl who made him feel, just for a moment, like he wasn't a world away from everything he'd ever known. The warmth of their easy conversation was a stark contrast to the cold, formal tension of the court. As they spoke, another figure appeared in the doorway, silent as a ghost. It was Tabitha, the quiet, blue-haired girl with the book and the little blue dragon on her shoulder. She had been part of the student delegation to the palace, though she had remained at the fringes, observing. She looked at Naruto, her expression as placid as ever. Golem, she said, her voice a soft monotone. Naruto paused, his chicken leg halfway to his mouth. What about it, Fauke? She uses a golem, a large one, made of earth. Saw it once, near the old aqueducts. She pointed vaguely to the northwest on the city map. Then, just as silently as she arrived, she turned and left. Naruto stared after her. A large earth golem, a specific location. It was the most useful piece of intelligence they'd gotten yet. He looked from the doorway where Tabitha had been to the smiling Siesta, to the anxious Louise. A strange team they were making. An hour later, the clones began to disperse one by one in puffs of smoke. Naruto's head swam for a moment as a flood of information rushed into his mind. The babble of the market, the smell of stale ale in a dozen taverns, the view from 100 rooftops. He sifted through the noise, cross-referencing, discarding, and then, a clear picture emerged. Got her, he said, standing up. What? How? Louise demanded. One of my clones found a pawn shop owner who was approached by a cloaked woman trying to sell a ridiculously ornate, walking stick. When he refused, she got angry. He said he smelled wet clay and moss on her. Another clone found a trail of disturbed earth on the rooftops leading northwest. He tapped the map exactly where Tabitha had indicated. The old aqueducts. She's hiding out in the sewer system beneath them. He started for the door. Let's go. Time to earn my map. Louise scrambled after him, her mind reeling. His methods were bizarre, alien, but they were undeniably effective. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that they might actually succeed. The chase was on. They raced through the city, Naruto leading the way with a preternatural sense of direction, Louise struggling to keep up. He moved with a fluid grace that defied the crowded streets, vaulting over market stalls, sliding under carts, and weaving through the throng of people like water flowing around rocks. They reached the crumbling ruins of the old aqueduct system as dusk began to fall. A large, jagged hole had been smashed in the side of a stone wall, leading down into the darkness of the sewer tunnels below. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. "She knows we're here," Naruto said, his senses on high alert. He could feel the vibrations in the ground, the telltale rumble of earth magic. "Stay behind me." He dropped into the tunnel without hesitation. Louise, after a moment's pause to steel her nerves, followed him. The tunnel was dark and slick with grime. The only light came from glowy moss that grew in patches on the walls. They didn't have to go far. The tunnel opened into a large, circular cistern. In the center stood a woman with wild, unkempt hair and a manic glint in her eyes. It was Falke. In her hands, she held a long, golden staff topped with a brilliant, pulsating ruby, the staff of destruction. At her feet, the ground churned, and a massive figure began to rise. It was a golem, 10 feet tall, made of sewer muck, stone, and compacted earth, its eyes glowing with a dull red light. "So, the little nobles sent a puppy to fetch their stick," Falke cackled, her voice echoing in the chamber. "I'm afraid you're too late. With the power of this staff, my lovely Fleur will be unstoppable." The golem, Fleur, let out a low, guttural roar and took a heavy step forward, shaking the entire cistern. Louise raised her wand, her hand trembling. "Stand down, Falke. You are no match for a mage of the Valier family." It was a bluff, and they both knew it. Falke just laughed. "The zero. You'll be the first one I crush." The golem charged. It was faster than its bulk suggested, its massive fists ready to pulverize them. "Naruto!" Louise screamed. But Naruto was already moving. "Distract her. Don't let her focus," he yelled as he blurred past Louise. He didn't run at the golem. He ran up the wall, his chakra-infused feet sticking to the slick stone. He sprinted in a horizontal line along the curve of the cistern, a tactic so bizarre it momentarily confused both Falke and her golem. Louise, snapping out of her fear, did as he said. She pointed her wand at Falke. Fireball. A tiny puff of smoke and a fizzle of sparks erupted from her wand. It was a pathetic failure. But it was enough. Falke, startled by the attempt, flinched. Her concentration wavered for a split second. That was all Naruto needed. While running along the wall, he had been forming a sphere of swirling, visible energy in his right hand. It spun with a high-pitched, grinding shriek. A miniature blue hurricane contained in his palm. Rasengan. He pushed off the wall, launching himself through the air directly at the golem's back. "Take this," he roared. He slammed the spinning sphere into the golem's torso. The impact was devastating. It wasn't an explosion of fire or light. It was pure, concussive force. The Rasengan tore through the magical construct of earth and stone like a drill, shattering its matrix. Cracks spider-webbed across the golem's body. With a deafening groan, the 10-foot monster disintegrated, collapsing into a heap of mud and rubble. Falke stared in horror at the pile of debris that had been her masterpiece. "Fleur, what did you do?" Naruto landed in a crouch, the Rasengan vanishing from his hand. He looked up, his blue eyes cold. "I told you, I'm not a puppy." Falke shrieked in rage and pointed the staff of destruction at him. The ruby at its tip flared with a violent, crimson light. "I'll kill you." Before she could unleash whatever power the staff held, a blur of motion came from the tunnel entrance. A small, blue dragon shot out, spitting a jet of freezing mist that coated Fuke's hands and the staff in a layer of thick ice. It was Sylphid, Tabitha's familiar. Tabitha herself stood in the tunnel mouth, her own wand raised. She had followed them. Falke cried out in pain and surprise, her hands frozen to the staff. The momentary opening was all Naruto needed. He crossed the distance in a heartbeat. He didn't punch her. He simply chopped the side of her neck with the edge of his hand. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed, unconscious. The staff of destruction clattered to the floor. Silence returned to the sewer, broken only by the dripping of water. Naruto picked up the staff. It felt cold, ancient, and humming with a strange, dormant power. A disappointing catalyst, the cleric had said. He wondered what they were looking for that was more powerful than this. He walked back to Louise, who was staring at the scene, her wand still raised. Her mouth slightly agape. Tabitha glided silently to her side. You did it, Louise whispered, a note of pure disbelief in her voice. Naruto handed the staff to her. We did it, he corrected, nodding his head towards Tabitha. Your distraction worked, and your friend here has good timing. Louise looked at the staff in her hands, then at Naruto, then at Tabitha. She, Louise the Zero, had been part of a successful, high-stakes mission. She hadn't been a failure. Her attack, pathetic as it was, had been useful. It had been part of his plan. A strange warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the cold knot of insecurity that lived there. It wasn't pride, it was something new, something like accomplishment. When they returned to the palace, the mood was one of stunned relief. Princess Henrietta accepted the staff of destruction, her gaze lingering on Naruto with a newfound, profound respect. She was true to her word. A royal cartographer was summoned, presenting Naruto with a massive, exquisitely detailed map of Halkygenia and its surrounding nations. He was also given a stack of books, bound in worn leather, detailing the history of the founder and the foundations of magic. As they were preparing to leave the palace, Siesta found them. She pressed a small, cloth-wrapped bundle into Naruto's hands. For the road, she said softly. Inside were warm meat buns. He gave her a smile that made her heart skip a beat. Thank you, Siesta, for everything. Later that night, back in the familiar quiet of Louise's room, the energy was different. The uncomfortable blanket of tension had been replaced by a thin, fragile sheet of mutual respect. Naruto was at the large wooden desk, poring over his new map under the dim lamplight, his new books stacked neatly beside him. Louise sat on her bed, watching him. He wasn't just a commoner. He wasn't just a familiar. He was a force of nature. He was tactical, intelligent, and possessed a power that defied all explanation. He was bound to her, and today, that bond had saved a national treasure and restored a piece of her honor. Naruto, she said softly. He looked up from the map, his expression neutral. Yeah, the way you fight, that spinning ball of, whatever it was. And the copies of you. It's not magic, is it? He was silent for a moment, his gaze distant, as if looking at a world she couldn't see. No, he said finally. It's not magic. He looked down at his own hands, then at the Gandalfur rune on his left. It's something else. Something from before. Before what? Before he was summoned. Or before something else entirely. She didn't ask. She knew he wouldn't answer. For now, it was enough. He was her familiar. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. But for the first time since the disastrous summoning, Louise Françoise Leblanc de la Vallière didn't feel like a complete and utter zero. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Zero and the One. The victory at Tristania was a fleeting reprieve. It earned Naruto a sliver of respect and Louise a fragile reprieve from her moniker, but the world did not pause to applaud them. War, like a storm gathering on a distant horizon, had been brewing for months. And its first thunderous clap was about to shake the kingdom to its foundations. The news arrived not by a frantic herald, but with the grim finality of a royal decree posted in the Academy's Grand Hall. Albion, the island nation of white cliffs and rebellious nobles, had officially declared war on Tristan. The pretender Cromwell, leader of the parliamentary faction known as Reconquista, had executed the royal family and now styled himself as regent protector. His first act was to amass an army, its banners casting long shadows across the channel. 70,000 men were on the march. The Tristan Academy of Magic was transformed overnight. The lazy, aristocratic atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a current of frantic, terrified energy. Students who had spent their days practicing parlor tricks and flirting in the courtyards were now being organized into emergency squadrons. Wands were polished with a grim purpose. The theoretical lessons on battle magic suddenly felt horrifyingly practical. Naruto stood on the roof of the main tower, the wind whipping his black tunic against him, his gaze fixed to the northwest, towards Albion. He didn't need a map to feel the threat. The very air felt heavy, saturated with fear and the metallic tang of unsheathed steel. From his vantage point, he could see the panicked mobilization. Carts laden with supplies clogged the roads, their drivers shouting. Mages in the Academy's service flew reconnaissance patterns on griffins, their forms small specks against the graying sky. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a knight. He was an unwilling visitor caught in the gears of a conflict that was not his own. But the bond on his hand, the Gandalfur rune, was a constant, dull ache. It tethered him to Louise, and Louise was a noble of Tristan. Her fate was intertwined with this kingdom's. Therefore, so was his. It was a bitter, infuriating truth. Footsteps echoed on the stone behind him. I thought I might find you up here. It was Louise. She had shed her standard school uniform for a set of light, practical leather armor over a simple tunic. It was ill-fitting, clearly borrowed, but it spoke volumes. The pampered noble girl was gone, replaced by a young woman bracing for war. Her face was pale, but her violet eyes were filled with a fierce, desperate resolve. You can see the smoke from the border villages from here, she said, her voice quiet. She came to stand beside him, her small frame dwarfed by the immensity of the vista. They're burning everything. Armies need to eat, Naruto replied, his voice flat. He'd seen it in his dream memories. The scorched earth, the terrified civilians. War was always the same. Princess Henrietta has mobilized every available mage, Louise continued, her hands gripping the stone parapet. The royal army is mustering at La Rochelle, but they're outnumbered nearly 2-1. They've asked the Academy to send its senior students to the front lines. To provide magical support. Naruto turned to look at her. And you're going? It wasn't a question. She nodded, her chin held high. I am a Valier. My family has defended this kingdom for generations. I will not hide while others fight. The words were proud, but he could feel the tremor of fear running through her, a frantic vibration along the magical tether connecting them. You're a terrible mage, Louise, he stated. Not with cruelty, but with blunt honesty. Your one successful spell was an accident that nearly got us both killed. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. Her shoulders slumped. I know, she whispered, her voice cracking. But I have to do something. I cannot be the Zero anymore. Not now. He saw it then. The crushing weight of a lifetime of failure, the desperate need to prove herself. To be worthy of the name she carried. It was a foolish, noble, and deeply human desire. And in that moment, he felt a flicker of something other than annoyance for her. Respect. He sighed, the sound lost in the wind. You're not going alone. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. But you're a commoner. You're not a soldier. They can't conscript you. They don't have to, he said, tapping the back of his left hand. This stupid mark on my hand ties me to you. If you go to the front lines, I go too. Besides, he added, a wry, dangerous smile touching his lips. I'm getting tired of these noble idiots thinking they're the only ones who know how to fight. Maybe it's time I showed them what a real one-man army looks like. The front lines were a vision of hell. The Tristanian army had established a defensive line along the crest of the Albior Hills, a series of rolling, grassy inclines that offered a tactical advantage. Below them, stretching as far as the eye could see, was the Albion host, a sea of steel and leather, a 70,000-headed monster breathing smoke and dust into the sky. The sheer scale of it was soul-crushing. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and blood. Wounded soldiers were being ferried back from the skirmish lines, their groans a constant, terrible chorus. The Academy mages were positioned behind the main infantry line, a nervous cluster of teenagers trying to project an aura of confidence they did not feel. Louise stood among them, her knuckles white where she gripped her wand. Tabitha was nearby, her face as impassive as ever. But her small dragon, Sylphid, clung to her shoulder, chirping nervously. Even Goosh was there, his usual arrogance replaced by a pale, grim-faced determination. Naruto was an anomaly. He stood apart from the mages, armed with nothing but a dozen strange, three-pronged knives he'd had the army's blacksmith fashion for him. They were kunai, and the feel of them in his hand was as familiar as his own heartbeat. The Tristanian commander, a grizzled veteran named General de Poitiers, had looked at Naruto with deep suspicion. A commoner familiar, a hero of a back alley brawl, was not a soldier. But Princess Henrietta's orders had been explicit: give him whatever he required. They're forming up for a major push, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter of the mages. His senses were stretched taut, a net of chakra cast over the battlefield. He could feel the shift in the enemy army, the coalescing intent, like a predator gathering its muscles to spring. Their heavy infantry is targeting the center. They're going to try and break our line right here. General de Poitiers rode over, his expression dark. Our intelligence confirms it, but they have us outnumbered. Our mages can slow them down with fire and wind, but it won't be enough to stop a charge of that size. Then we don't slow them down, Naruto said. We break their charge before it even begins. The general stared at him. And how do you propose one man does that? Naruto just grinned. Watch. He walked to the edge of the hill, in full view of the enemy army. He was a single, insignificant figure in black and orange against the vast backdrop of war. He brought his hands together in the familiar cross seal. Mass shadow clone jutsu. The world erupted in smoke. Not one or two puffs, but hundreds. A tidal wave of white smoke billowed out from him, covering a huge swath of the hilltop. The Tristanian soldiers cried out in alarm, shielding their eyes. The mages, Louise included, stared in utter disbelief. When the smoke cleared, the hilltop was no longer empty. Standing behind Naruto, in neat, disciplined ranks, were 500 identical copies of him. An army had appeared from thin air. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the Tristanian line. General de Poitiers' jaw was slack, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Louise felt the world tilt on its axis. She had seen him make one clone. Then 10. But this was godlike. This was impossible. On the plains below, the Albion army, which had been preparing its momentous charge, faltered. Horns blew uncertainly. Commanders shouted conflicting orders. What was this trick? An illusion? Naruto's voice, amplified by the sheer number of his copies, rang out across the battlefield. All right, boys, you know the plan. Cause as much chaos as humanly possible. Go. With a collective, deafening war cry, the 500 shadow clones surged over the crest of the hill. They didn't charge in a neat line like soldiers. They scattered like a broken bottle, a wave of orange and black chaos descending upon the Albion army. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Albion forces were prepared for a head-on clash of shields and spears. They were not prepared for this. The clones were everywhere at once. A squad of them appeared behind an artillery line, overwhelming the crews and sabotaging the trebuchets. Another group dropped from the sky, having been thrown by other clones, into the midst of the enemy command tent, sending commanders scattering in panic. They swarmed the Albion heavy infantry, not engaging in prolonged fights, but striking and vanishing. They'd appear, throw a kunai to sever a strap on a shield, punch a knight in the back of the knee, and disperse in a puff of smoke before a sword could swing. Only to be replaced by 3 more. It wasn't a battle, it was a pestilence. The entire 70,000-man army was thrown into disarray, trying to fight an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. An enemy that felt no pain and could be replaced instantly. From the hilltop, the Tristanian soldiers watched, their fear replaced by a kind of manic glee. They started to cheer. The mages, spurred to action, began to unleash their own spells on the confused and disorganized enemy, their fireballs and wind scythes finding purchase where before there would have been a shield wall. Naruto, the original, remained on the hill, his eyes closed, his mind connected to every single one of his clones. He was a general processing information from 500 different points on the battlefield. He felt every blow, saw through every pair of eyes. The mental strain was immense, a roaring torrent of sensory input that would have driven any other man insane. But he was used to it. This was his art, the art of the shinobi. He directed a group of 100 clones to the left flank, where the enemy cavalry was attempting to rally. Another 50 were sent to harass the archers, preventing them from loosing a single coordinated volley. He was playing the entire battlefield like a musician plays an instrument. Louise watched him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was the truth of him. The boy who had seemed like a loud-mouthed peasant was a military genius, a one-man apocalypse. The power he wielded was not the brute force of a dragon or the elemental fury of a mage. It was something more insidious, more intelligent. It was the power of overwhelming, undeniable competence. The Albion charge never came. Their formation was broken, their morale shattered. They had been defeated not by an army, but by a concept. But the battle was not over. From the enemy command center, a new force emerged. A group of about 30 elite knights on horseback, clad in gleaming black armor, immune to the chaos. They cut through the clones with ruthless efficiency, their enchanted swords dispelling them in a single touch. At their head was a tall, imposing figure in ornate, silver-trimmed armor, wielding a massive greatsword that pulsed with a faint red light. This was Cromwell's champion, a man whispered to be the strongest knight in Albion. Naruto's eyes snapped open. The clones couldn't stop them. This required a personal touch. "Louise," he yelled, not taking his eyes off the charging knights. "I need a path cleared. Now." He began to run, charging down the hill to meet the elite knights head-on. At the same time, he started to form the Rasengan in his hand, the high-pitched shriek of its creation cutting through the din of battle. Louise saw him running, a lone figure against 30 elite magical knights. Fear, cold and absolute, seized her. He was going to die. The Gandalfur rune on her hand burned, a conduit for her terror. He was her familiar, her responsibility, her something. She couldn't let him die. All her failures, all her frustrations, all her desperate yearning to be more than the zero, coalesced into a single, white-hot point of focus. The empty, hungry void within her, the power she could never control, churned. She saw Naruto, his back to her, charging towards his death, and a raw, primal scream tore from her throat. "Get away from him!" She thrust her wand forward. The world went white. It was not a spell. It was a cataclysm, a beam of pure, annihilating energy, whiter than a house and brighter than the sun, erupted from her wand. It wasn't fire, or wind, or earth. It was nothing. It was the essence of the void, given form. The air itself seemed to unravel as the beam tore across the battlefield. It didn't just destroy what it touched, it erased it from existence. The 30 elite knights and their commander, who had been seconds from reaching Naruto, vanished. They didn't even have time to scream. The beam continued, carving a half-mile-long, 50-foot-wide trench of glassy, fused earth straight through the center of the Albion army before dissipating, leaving a smoking, silent scar on the world. Silence. The entire battlefield, both Tristanian and Albion soldiers, froze. The fighting stopped. Everyone stared at the colossal trench, at the wisp of smoke rising from the wand of the small, pink-haired girl on the hill. Naruto had thrown himself to the ground as the beam passed just over his head, the sheer power of it making every hair on his body stand on end. He pushed himself up, his ears ringing, and looked back at the devastation. Then he looked at Louise. She was standing there, swaying, her eyes wide and unfocused. Blood trickled from her nose. The Gandalfur rune on high. S hand was blazing with an almost painful heat. He could feel her, the exhaustion, the shock, the terrifying emptiness of the power she had just unleashed. She had poured everything she had into that one, single, perfect spell. He raced back up the hill to her side just as her eyes rolled back and her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground, her small frame feeling impossibly light in his arms. She was unconscious, but she was alive. The Albion army was broken. Seeing their elite champions and a significant portion of their infantry simply deleted from reality was a blow from which they could not recover. A disorganized, panicked retreat began. The battle was over. Tristan had won. But as Naruto held the unconscious Louise, looking at the scar of utter annihilation she had carved into the landscape, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The power she wielded, it was absolute, terrifying, and it had saved his life. Later, in the command tent, the mood was one of celebratory disbelief. General de Poitiers was treating Naruto not as a familiar, but as an allied commander, clapping him on the back and pouring him wine, which he politely refused. "In all my years," the general boomed, "I have never seen a victory like this. An army of one, and a final spell of divine retribution. The bards will sing of this for 1,000 years. The golden ghost of Tristan and the angel of the void." Naruto wasn't listening. His attention was focused on a corner of the tent where Louise was resting on a cot, tended to by a healer. Tabitha sat on a stool beside her, her book closed in her lap. Her gaze fixed on her friend's sleeping face. Siesta was also there. Having insisted on coming to the front as a battlefield nurse, she was gently dabbing Louise's forehead with a damp cloth. She looked up as Naruto approached, her eyes full of worry. "How is she?" Naruto asked, his voice low. "Exhausted," Siesta replied. "The healer said her magical reserves are completely empty. He's never seen anything like it. It's as if she poured her own life force into that spell." Naruto knelt beside the cot, looking at Louise's pale face. Her expression was peaceful in sleep, free of the constant anxiety that usually pinched her features. He had seen her as a brat, a failure, a source of constant irritation. But today, on the battlefield, he had seen something else. He had seen her potential. And he had seen her vulnerability. She had unleashed a power that could shatter the world to save him. The thought settled in his chest with an unexpected weight. A commotion outside the tent drew his attention. A captured high-ranking Albion officer, a Reconquista fanatic, was being dragged past, shouting defiantly. "You've won nothing, Tristanian dogs. The Regent Protector serves a higher purpose. A holier power. The holy man in Romalia has promised it. The daughter of the apostate will be delivered to him, and the age of Brimir will end." The guards shoved a gag in his mouth. But Naruto had heard enough. Holy man in Romalia. Daughter of the apostate. His gaze flickered to Tabitha. She was the daughter of the disgraced former general of Gallia, a man accused of treason. An apostate. He remembered the whispers he'd overheard in the palace. Reconquista's secondary objective, the capture of Tabitha. It was all connected. Albion, Reconquista, the Pope in Romalia. This war wasn't just a war. It was a move in a much larger, more dangerous game. And Louise, with her terrifying void magic, and Tabitha, with her hunted bloodline, were pieces on the board. He stood up, a new, cold resolve settling over him. He had been dragged into this world, bound into this conflict. But he was no longer just a passive participant. They had threatened his friends. They had tried to kill him. Now, it was personal. He looked down at Louise, then at Siesta and Tabitha. They were his responsibility now. Not because of some magical rune, but because he had chosen it. He would protect them, and he would find the people pulling the strings of this war and make them regret ever learning his name. The Zero had become a one, a wielder of unimaginable power. And he, the Gandalfer, the Golden Ghost, had just found his new mission. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A bond forged in fire and fealty. The return from the Albior Hills was a stark contrast to the grim march out. They were not soldiers returning from a battle. They were legends returning from a myth. The road to Tristania was lined with cheering villagers who threw flowers and waved makeshift banners. The names they shouted were not for General de Poitiers or the royal army, but for them. The Golden Ghost. They cried for Naruto, their voices filled with a reverent awe usually reserved for saints. The Angel of the Void. They cheered for Louise, who sat beside him in the open-topped carriage, her face flushed, a bewildered but pleased smile on her lips. Naruto endured the adoration with a practiced grin, waving back at the crowds. But his mind was elsewhere. The victory felt hollow, a single battle in a war whose true purpose he was only just beginning to understand. The captured officer's words echoed. In his thoughts, the holy man in Romalia, the daughter of the apostate, it was a shadow stretching over their victory, a threat that followed them home. He was a hero, but he was also a problem. He knew at the moment they re-entered the capital. The common folk saw a savior, a hero of the people. But the nobles, watching from their balconies with tight, forced smiles, saw something else entirely. They saw a commoner who could conjure an army from thin air, a man who answered to no lord and possessed a power that dwarfed their own. He was a disruption to the natural order of things, a walking, breathing threat to the very foundation of their authority. The political machinations began almost immediately. Whispers in the court turned to open debate. What was to be done with the Gandalfer? He was not a noble, held no title, swore no fealty. His only official connection was to Louise, and that was a magical bond, not a political one. Some argued he should be given a title, a lordship, a place within the system to control him. Others, more fearful, argued he was too dangerous, that he should be imprisoned or exiled, the Gandalfer rune somehow severed. They were staying in a suite of rooms in the palace. A reward for their service. It was there, 2 days after their return, that the situation came to a head. Louise burst into the room, her face pale with fury. Naruto was sitting by the window, idly spinning a kunai on his finger while Siesta mended a tear in his tunic. Tabitha was in her usual corner, absorbed in a book, but her stillness was more attentive than any overt listening. "They're trying to take you away from me," Louise said, her voice trembling with rage. Naruto caught the kunai, his movements economical. "Who's they?" "The Royal Council, Viscount de Mortain and Baron de Florac. They're arguing that my instability makes me an unfit master for a familiar of such strategic importance. They're proposing that your contract be magically transferred to a more senior and stable mage. To General de Poitiers." Siesta's needle froze mid-stitch. Tabitha's eyes lifted from her book. Naruto's own eyes narrowed. Transferred. Like a piece of property. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. "And they can do that. There are ancient, forbidden rituals," Louise admitted, her voice dropping. "They require the consent of the crown. Princess Henrietta is resisting them, but the pressure is immense. They say you're a stray cannon and I'm a child holding the match. They're afraid of you. They're afraid of us." He stood up, walking over to her. He could feel her fear and her fury pulsing through the Gandalfur rune, a chaotic storm of emotion. "Let them be afraid," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not going anywhere. They won't stop, Naruto," she cried, frustration welling in her eyes. "They will find a way. They'll use laws, traditions, anything they can to separate us. To control you. Unless you are bound to me by something more than just a familiar's rune. Something they cannot break." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He saw the desperate, radical idea forming in her mind. It was a political gambit of astonishing audacity. "I am a Valier," she said, her voice gaining strength, her resolve hardening. "My name is one of the oldest and most respected in Tristan. I am the sole heir to my family's title and lands. A title carries weight. A noble house offers protection." She took a deep breath, her gaze locking with his. The flighty, insecure girl was gone. In her place was a political player making the move of her life. "Marry me, Naruto," she said, the words clear and steady. "Become my husband. Take the Valier name. As my husband, as a noble lord by marriage, no one in this kingdom, not even the council, would dare try to take you from me. Your loyalty would be to my house, and my house would be your shield." Silence. Siesta's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Tabitha slowly closed her book. The soft thump of leather on leather echoing in the room. Naruto stared at Louise, truly seeing her. This wasn't a love confession. It was a declaration of war. A brilliant, pragmatic, and utterly insane move on the grand political chessboard. She was offering him a fortress, a legal and social armor that would make him untouchable. And in doing so, she was tying her own fate to his, irrevocably. But the thought of it sent a jolt of something complicated through him. Marriage. To Louise. The loud, proud, infuriating girl who had screamed and fought and then unleashed the apocalypse to save his life. He felt a fierce, protective loyalty to her, a bond forged in the heat of battle. She had seen his power and, instead of trying to cage it, was trying to build a castle around it. His gaze flickered to Siesta. Kind, gentle Siesta, who had been his first friend in this strange world. The girl from his own village, who saw not the golden ghost but just Naruto. Who brought him food and mended his clothes and spoke to him with a warmth that felt like home. His affection for her was simple, pure, and deep. The thought of a future that didn't include her quiet, steady presence was a cold and empty one. Then his eyes found Tabitha. Silent, watchful Tabitha, the chevalier. She had become his shadow on the battlefield, her magic a perfect complement to his chaos. She understood strategy, understood silence. He could feel the profound, unspoken pain she carried, and his sole deep instinct was to stand between her and the world that had caused it. He trusted her with his life without ever having to say a word. Their connection was a quiet, unshakable thing. He looked back at Louise, his expression troubled. "I can't," he said, his voice rough. Louise's carefully constructed composure shattered. Her face fell, hurt and confusion warring in her eyes. You refuse. But why? It's the perfect solution. Because it's not just you, he said, the honest words tearing out of him before he could stop them. He gestured with his head towards the other two girls. It's not that simple. The room was silent again, but this time the silence was charged with a different kind of tension. Siesta's face was beet red, her eyes fixed on the floor. Tabitha's expression was, for the first time, not entirely placid. A flicker of surprise, of something vulnerable, crossed her features before being suppressed. Louise followed his gaze. She looked at Siesta, the common maid who had shown her familiar more kindness in 5 minutes than she had in a week. She looked at Tabitha, her fellow student, the quiet knight who had followed them into the sewers and fought by their side. She saw the bonds Naruto had forged, bonds of friendship, loyalty, and affection that had nothing to do with her or her summoning. The old Louise, the proud, jealous noble, would have screamed. She would have thrown a tantrum, accused him of treason, of infidelity to his master. But that Louise had died, somewhere on the bloody fields of Albior. The new Louise, the one who had tasted true power and true fear, who had seen her familiar command an army and had, in turn, saved his life, was a pragmatist. She was a commander, and a commander does not discard valuable assets. A commander does not break up a winning team. She took a long, slow breath, her mind working furiously, processing the emotion. Data with the same cold logic she was beginning to apply to politics. She saw the problem not as an obstacle, but as a variable in a complex equation. The goal was to protect Naruto, to bind him to her, and to secure their collective power. His feelings for Siesta and Tabitha were a complication, but also a strength. Their loyalty to him meant their loyalty to her house. A truly radical, truly revolutionary idea began to form. An idea that would shatter centuries of Hulkigenian tradition. Very well, she said, her voice eerily calm. Naruto, Siesta, and Tabitha all looked at her, surprised by her placid tone. The purpose of this marriage is to create a political and military alliance, Louise stated, her voice taking on the quality of a general laying out a battle plan. It is to form a new house. The house of Valier Uzumaki, a power that Tristan cannot ignore or control. A house is more than a husband and wife. It is a collection of allegiances. It is a stronghold. She turned to Siesta. Siesta, you are from a common family in Tarbes. You have no station, no protection. But you are loyal to Naruto. And he is loyal to you. She then turned to Tabitha. Tabitha, you are the daughter of the apostate, Chevalier de Gallia. You are the last of your line, a political target for forces we do not yet understand. You have no allies, no one to guard your back. Finally, she looked back at Naruto. You said you cannot choose. You said it's not that simple. You were right. It is not simple. It is a matter of survival. She stood up straight, her small frame radiating an authority. Why that was no longer borrowed from her family name, but forged in her own will. Then don't choose, Louise declared, her voice ringing with the force of a royal decree. He will marry me to secure the name and title. But the house we build will protect all of us. Siesta, I will elevate you. You will no longer be a maid. You will be a formal ward of my house, a sworn companion. Tabitha, I will offer you the alliance your family has been denied. You will be absorbed into our house, your lands and titles, what little remains of them, sheltered under the Valier banner. We will be one house. One unit. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. And when the time is right, when our position is secure, a noble house of sufficient power can petition the crown for exceptions. Ancient precedents exist. A lord taking more than one wife to secure alliances or produce heirs, especially in times of war. It is almost unheard of in modern times, but it is not impossible. She was offering polygamy, a formal, politically sanctioned union between the four of them. It was a move of such breathtaking audacity that Naruto was left momentarily speechless. She wasn't just accepting his feelings for the other girls. She was weaponizing them, forging them into the foundation of a new political dynasty. You would do that, Siesta whispered, her voice barely audible. The offer to be elevated, to be protected, to be part of something, was a dream beyond anything she could have imagined. Tabitha looked at Louise, a flicker of profound gratitude in her usually stoic eyes. An alliance, protection, a shield against the shadows that hunted her. It was everything she needed. Naruto stared at Louise, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was a grin of pure, unadulterated admiration. She was incredible, absolutely, terrifyingly incredible. He had expected a fight, an argument, tears. Instead, she had met his emotional dilemma with a brilliant strategic solution that protected everyone he cared about. "You're crazy," he said, the words filled with wonder. "Completely and utterly insane." "I am a Valier," she replied, a faint, triumphant smile on her lips. "And I do not lose what is mine." He stepped forward and, for the first time, he was the one to initiate contact. He gently took her hand, not the one with the familiar's rune, and brought it to his lips. It wasn't the kiss of a familiar sealing a contract. It was the kiss of a man sealing a pact. An equal, a partner. "All right, Louise Françoise Leblanc de la Valliere," he said, his blue eyes locking with her violet ones. "Let's get married." The ceremony was not a grand affair. There was no cathedral, no choir, no legion of nobles in attendance. Princess Henrietta, displaying a political acumen that surprised her council, had given her official blessing with breathtaking speed, silencing all opposition before it could fully mobilize. The marriage of the Angel of the Void to her golden ghost was spun as a romantic fairy tale. A story of love and heroism that captured the public's imagination and made it politically impossible to oppose. They were married in the fields outside the academy, under the shade of a large oak tree. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows. It was the place where they had first met, where he had been torn from his world. Now, it was the place where he was choosing to build a new one. The guests were few. Princess Henrietta was there, standing as Louise's official witness. Old man Osmond officiated, his voice thick with emotion. Siesta stood beside Louise, no longer in a maid's uniform but in a simple, elegant blue dress that Henrietta had provided. Tabitha stood beside Naruto, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, a silent, steadfast guardian. A few of their more loyal classmates, Kirch, Goosh, who had become surprisingly humbled after his defeat in the subsequent battle, watched from a respectful distance. Naruto was dressed not in formal silks, but in a new, custom-made version of his familiar clothes, a fine black tunic and trousers, with a flowing, high-collared orange coat embroidered with the Valier crest intertwined with a swirling, nine-tailed fox design he had sketched himself. Louise wore a simple white dress, her pink hair adorned with a single white rose. She looked not like a political player or a wielder of apocalyptic magic, but simply like a young woman. Beautiful and nervous and happy. When Osmond pronounced them husband and wife, Naruto didn't hesitate. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was a real kiss, all of the chaos and fire and respect that defined their relationship. When they broke apart, the cheers from their small audience were genuine. He then turned to Siesta. He took her hands in his. "Siesta," he said, his voice soft enough for only her to hear. "Thank you for being my friend when I had no one." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gentle, promising gesture that made her whole world light up. Finally, he faced Tabitha. He didn't say anything. Words were not their language. He simply met her gaze, and in that shared look, a universe of understanding passed between them. He reacted, head out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "It was a promise. I am your shield," she responded with a barely perceptible nod. "It was a promise in return. And I am your sword." That night, they did not return to the palace. They returned to Louise's room at the academy. Their room. It was small, cramped, and utterly transformed. Extra beds had been brought in. It was no longer a student's dorm. It was the first headquarters of the House of Valier Uzumaki. As night fell, a formal, ornate invitation arrived by royal messenger. It was embossed with the seal of the Holy See of Romalia. Naruto broke the wax seal and unrolled the parchment. The script was elegant, the words flowery and pious. It was an invitation from His Holiness, Pope Joseph himself. He extended his warmest congratulations on the heroic victory and their blessed union. He invited the celebrated heroes of Tristan, Lord Naruto and Lady Louise, to Romalia to receive a personal blessing and to be honored in a grand ceremony. It was presented as an honor, a glorious invitation, but Naruto, reading between the lines, felt a chill crawl up his spine. The paper felt cold to the touch. The holy man in Romalia. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The spider was inviting the flies into its parlor. He looked up from the scroll at the three women who were now his family. His wives, in heart if not yet all in law. Louise, the brilliant, fiery politician. Siesta, the warm, steady heart of their home. Tabitha, the silent, deadly guardian. They had just forged their alliance, their shield. And their first test was already upon them. "Looks like we're going on a honeymoon," he said, his voice grim. To Romalia. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Shadow of Romalia. The journey to Romalia was an exercise in contradictions. They traveled not as soldiers or adventurers, but as celebrated dignitaries, their carriage part of a small, formal procession flying the banners of both Tristan and the Valliere house. The roads were cleared for them. The inns they stayed in were the finest, and at every town they passed through, they were met with crowds eager to catch a glimpse of the heroes of Albior. It was a comfortable, luxurious, and deeply unsettling experience. Naruto felt like a caged animal. The slow, regal pace of the procession grated on his nerves. He spent most of the journey on the roof of their carriage, his legs dangling over the side. His senses stretched out, tasting the air, listening to the world. He was watching for threats, but the only hostility he felt was the cloying, perfumed sweetness of politics. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere was a complex tapestry of their new reality. Louise, now formerly Lady Valliere Uzumaki, was in her element. She was devouring books on Romalian politics and ecclesiastical law, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was no longer just a mage, she was the head of a new house, and she was preparing for a diplomatic battle. Siesta, elevated to the station of Lady Companion, was struggling to adapt. She wore the fine dresses Henrietta had gifted her, but she moved in them with a self-conscious stiffness, as if expecting to be told to get back to the kitchens at any moment. She found her solace in taking care of them, ensuring their meals were to their liking, that Naruto's coat was always clean, that Louise's books were neatly stacked. These small acts of service were her anchor in a world of dizzying change. Tabitha remained Tabitha, silent, observant, her ever-present book in her lap. But there was a subtle difference. She no longer sat apart. She sat with them, a quiet, integral part of their circle. Her dragon, Sylphid, would often curl up on Naruto's shoulder, a warm, purring weight that he found surprisingly comforting. Their conversations were a strange mix of the mundane and the monumental. One moment, they'd be arguing about the best way to cook rabbit. The next, Naruto would be quietly explaining the strategic importance of a mountain pass on the map. While Louise cross-referenced it with known troop deployments and Tabitha pointed out a potential ambush point he'd missed. They were becoming a unit, their individual strand. GTHS weaving together into something formidable. "He wants something," Naruto said one afternoon, startling the others from their quiet pursuits. He was staring south, towards the distant, unseen mountains that bordered Romalia. "This Pope. This isn't a celebration, it's an inspection. He is the spiritual leader of all Halkygenia," Louise countered, though her voice lacked conviction. "It is his right, his duty, to acknowledge feats of great power. My spell at Albior. It has the theologians in an uproar. They're calling it a miracle, a manifestation of the founder's divine will." "And what do you think it is?" Naruto asked, turning to look at her. Louise hesitated, the Gandalfur rune on his hand tingling in response to her uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "It felt empty. It felt like I reached into a hole inside myself and pulled out everything. It almost took me with it." "The Pope wants to see that hole for himself," Naruto said grimly. "And he wants to know High Tabitha as a target for his pet fanatics in Reconquista." At the mention of her name, Tabitha's gaze flickered up from her book. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cold, weary resignation. Siesta, ever the heart of the group, placed a comforting hand on Louise's arm. "We won't let him harm you. Any of you. Lord Naruto won't let him." The faith in her voice was absolute, a simple, unshakable truth. It was a faith Naruto was determined to justify. Romalia, when they finally arrived, was breathtaking. It was a city carved from white stone and faith, its towers and spires reaching for the heavens. The central feature was the Grand Cathedral, a structure so vast and ornate it seemed less like a building and more like a mountain sculpted by the hands of gods. The air was clean, the streets were pristine, and the citizens all seemed to have a serene, beatific smile on their faces. It was the most peaceful, beautiful, and deeply unnerving place Naruto had ever seen. The whole city felt like a mask. They were met by a delegation of cardinals, their crimson robes a splash of blood against the white stone. The leader of the delegation, a man with a warm smile and cold, calculating eyes, introduced himself as Julio Cesare, the Pope's personal attaché. He was handsome, charming, and his every word was a carefully polished stone of diplomacy. Lord Naruto, Lady Louise, Julio said, his voice smooth as silk. His Holiness has been so eager to meet the saviors of Tristan. Your power is a gift from the founder, a sign of his continued blessing upon our world. His eyes lingered on Louise for a moment, then shifted to Naruto, a flicker of intense curiosity in their depths. And you, the Gandalfer, a spirit of heroism summoned in a time of need. Truly, these are miraculous times. Naruto didn't smile back. We're just here for the party, he said, his bluntness causing a minor ripple of shock through the assembled clerics. Giulio's smile didn't falter. Of course, and Romalia knows how to throw a party. They were escorted to a lavish villa set aside for their use, a palace of marble and fountains. It was beautiful, opulent, and a gilded cage. Naruto immediately sent a shadow clone to scout the city, a silent, unseen observer to map the streets, listen to the gossip, and find the cracks in the city's perfect facade. Their audience with Pope Joseph was set for the following day. He received them not in a grand throne room, but in a sun-drenched garden atop the papal palace. He was an old man, with kind, crinkling eyes, a gentle smile, and a long white beard. He wasn't dressed in stiff, formal vestments, but in a simple white robe. He was watering a bed of roses, and he looked less like the ruler of a religion and more like a beloved grandfather. "Ah, the young heroes," he said, his voice warm and resonant. He set down his watering can and beckoned them closer. "Come, come, let an old man look at the faces that have given our troubled continent a glimmer of hope." He was brilliant. Naruto could see it instantly. The grandfatherly act was a masterful piece of theater. Every gesture, every word, was designed to disarm, to build trust. He praised Louise's bravery, her devotion. He spoke to Naruto with a surprising depth of knowledge about the Gandalfer legends, treating him not as a curiosity but as a figure of historical significance. "The Gandalfer is the left hand of God," the Pope said, his eyes twinkling. "A wielder of impossible skill, a master of any tool. But you, Lord Naruto, you seem to be more. That army you summoned, that is not a skill of the Gandalfer. That is a power all your own. It is magnificent." "Just a trick," Naruto said, keeping his expression neutral. "Ah, but the greatest miracles often seem like simple tricks to those who perform them." The Pope countered smoothly. He then turned his serene gaze on Louise. "And you, my child? The void, a power so rare, so misunderstood. The ancient texts are all but silent on its true nature. They say it is the fifth element, the nothingness from which the other four were born. To wield it is to touch the very face of creation." His words were reverent, but his eyes were hungry. It was the look of a scientist examining a fascinating but potentially explosive specimen. He then steered the conversation, with seemingly casual grace, into a philosophical debate. He spoke of the endless cycle of human conflict, the greed of kings, the pride of nobles, the suffering of the common man. "Mankind is flawed, Lord Naruto," the Pope said, his voice laced with a profound, gentle sadness. "We are a race of brilliant, beautiful, and broken children. We build, and we destroy. We love, and we hate. Founder Brimir gave us the gift of magic, a tool to build a better world, and we have used it to build better weapons. Perhaps mankind is not meant to guide its own destiny. Perhaps we require a firmer hand, a cleansing fire, a great reset, to scour away the flaws and begin anew." Naruto felt a chill. This was it. The mask was slipping. This wasn't the talk of a religious leader. It was the talk of a fanatic, an ideologue who believed in ends justifying any means. "And I suppose you're the one to light the match?" Naruto asked, his voice deceptively mild. Pope Joseph's smile widened, but it no longer reached his eyes. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, my son. Sometimes, to save the garden, One must be willing to pull up the weeds, even if the weeds have grown beautiful flowers. His gaze drifted pointedly to Tabitha, who had remained silent throughout the entire audience. The meeting ended soon after, with the Pope bestowing his formal blessing upon them and inviting them to a grand banquet that evening. As they walked away, back through the pristine marble halls, Naruto knew with absolute certainty that they were in mortal danger. That night, as they prepared for the banquet, one of Naruto's shadow clones that had been scouting the city dispersed. The memories flooded his mind. He saw the city's underbelly. The beggars who were mysteriously swept from the streets before any major festival. The whispers of a special unit of guards, the Ecliptic Guard, W. Ho answered only to the Pope and dealt with heretical matters with brutal finality. And he had found something else. An elf. A sun elf with blonde hair, moving through the shadows, watching the papal palace with the same intensity as Naruto's own clones. He was a spy. At the banquet, the full weight of Romelia's power was on display. The hall was filled with cardinals, bishops, and commanders from the church's military orders. Julio Cesare was at their side constantly, a gracious host and a subtle interrogator, his questions about their powers and the Battle of Albior relentless. During a lull in the festivities, Julio led Naruto to a balcony overlooking the city. "Your power, Lord Naruto," he said, his voice low. "This chakra, it's not magic. It's a manipulation of life energy itself, isn't it? An internal source, independent of the elements. It's the kind of power the founder sought to stamp out." He called it heretical. "The founder sounds like a real piece of work," Naruto replied, leaning against the balustrade. Julio chuckled. He was a man of vision and conviction. He believed that mankind's potential for internal power was a path to chaos. He believed we needed an external system, his system of 4 elements, to maintain order. But some of us believe he was wrong. We believe he shackled humanity, cutting us off from our true potential. He was testing him, trying to see if Naruto could be an ally in his and the Pope's revisionist theology. "I believe in the potential of my friends," Naruto said, his gaze hard. "And I believe in protecting them from anyone who tries to use them as a key to unlock some dusty old cage." Julio's mask of charm finally cracked. A flicker of cold, hard anger showed in his eyes. "A shame," he said softly. "You could have been a prophet in the new world. Instead, you will merely be a martyr." He turned and walked back into the banquet hall. The threat was now open. They left the party soon after, pleading exhaustion. Back in their villa, the atmosphere was thick with tension. "Lock the doors," Naruto said, his voice grim. "We're not safe here." Louise, her face pale, began to chant a locking spell, reinforcing the heavy oak doors with magical energy. Siesta nervously checked the windows, while Tabitha drew her sword, her posture radiating a quiet readiness. "What did he say to you?" Louise asked Naruto. "He too. Me were on the wrong side of history," Naruto replied, placing his kunai on the table. "The Pope isn't a follower of Brimir. He's the leader of a cult that thinks Brimir was a tyrant. They want to undo his work. And for some reason, they think you and your void magic are the way to do it." Suddenly, a floorboard in the corner of the room creaked. In a flash, Tabitha was there, her sword leveled. Naruto was beside her, a kunai in his hand. From the shadows, a figure emerged, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. It was the blonde elf Naruto's clone had seen. He was wounded, a dark stain spreading across his tunic. "Please," the elf gasped, his voice weak. "I mean you no harm. My name is Beetlesha. I am a spy, for the Council of Elves. We have been watching Romelia for decades." "Why are you here?" Naruto demanded. "To warn you," the elf said, stumbling forward. "You are to be assassinated. Tonight, the Ecliptic Guard. They found my partner." He collapsed to the floor, and Naruto saw the hilt of a strange, dark dagger protruding from his back. "Julio. He is the commander of the Ecliptic Guard. He is the Pope's right hand, his enforcer." As if on cue, the magically sealed doors of the villa exploded inward, showering the room in splinters. Standing in the doorway were a dozen figures clad in form-fitting black leather armor, their faces hidden by full helms designed to look like a solar eclipse. The Ecliptic Guard. At their head stood Julio, his charming smile replaced by a look of cold, predatory zeal. He held a long, thin rapier that seemed to drink the light. "Such a shame to interrupt your evening," Julio said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "But heretical conversations must be silenced." The guards surged into the room. They moved with a silent, coordinated deadliness that made the knights at Albior look like clumsy amateurs. Their blades were a strange, black metal that hissed in the air. Naruto met the first two, his kunai a blur of steel. He was faster, more agile, but their blades were a problem. When his kunai scraped against one of their swords, he felt a jarring sensation, a deadening of the chakra flowing to his arm. Our blades are forged in quenched starlight and enchanted to disrupt magical and life energies, Julio explained with the detached air of a lecturer. Your chakra will be of little use here. Your Gandalfer skills will be nullified. While Naruto engaged the guards in a desperate, close-quarters melee, Louise and Tabitha stood back to back, unleashing spells. But the guards were preternaturally fast, dodging fireballs and wind scythes. One of them threw a small, metallic disc that slapped against the wall and flared with a purple light. Louise cried out as she felt her connection to her magic stutter. As if a thick blanket had been thrown over it. A suppression field. This was an anti-mage, anti-Gandalfer task force. They had been designed specifically to kill people like them. Siesta, seeing Louise falter, did the only thing she could. She grabbed a heavy silver platter from a nearby table and hurled it at a guard who was advancing on Louise. It bounced harmlessly off his helmet, but it bought a precious second. Naruto fought with a ferocity born of desperation. He abandoned his chakra-enhanced strikes and relied on pure, raw taijutsu. He was still faster, still stronger, but it was 12 against 1. And every clash of blades sent a numbing shock through his system. He saw Tabitha get cornered, two guards pressing her, their dark blades forcing her onto the defensive. He saw Louise street, struggling to cast even the simplest spell. He saw Siesta cowering behind an overturned sofa. He was losing. The dying elf, Beetlesha, pushed himself up on one elbow. "The archive," he choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the floor. "Under the cathedral. He seeks the progenitor," he coughed, blood spattering his lips. "Julio. His ring, it's the key." Then, with a final, shuddering gasp, the elf lay still. The progenitor. The name resonated in Naruto's mind with the force of a thunderclap. Julio, seeing the tide of battle turning in his favor, decided to end it. He moved with blinding speed. His rapier a silver streak aimed at Louise's heart. Naruto saw it. There was no time to intercept, no time to think. He poured every ounce of chakra he could muster into a single, desperate gamble. It wasn't a jutsu. It was a raw, explosive release. "Everyone, get down," he roared. He slammed his hands on the floor and unleashed a shockwave of pure chakra. It wasn't an attack, it was a kinetic blast. The suppression field flickered and died. The guards were thrown from their feet. The furniture, the windows, the very stone of the villa groaned. Julio, caught off guard by the raw, untamed nature of the blast, was knocked off balance, his killing blow going wide. In that single moment of chaos, Naruto acted. He threw a kunai not at Julio, but at the large, ornate chandelier hanging above him. The kunai severed the chain. The massive construct of crystal and iron crashed down. Julio leapt back with a curse, narrowly avoiding being crushed. The path to the door was clear. "Go, now," Naruto yelled. He didn't wait for an answer. He scooped up Siesta in one arm, grabbed Louise with the other, and bolted for the shattered doorway. Tabitha was right behind him, her sword flashing as she cut down a guard who was trying to rise. They burst out into the cool night air, running for their lives through the pristine, moonlit streets of Romalia. Alarms began to blare across the holy city. Ey were fugitives in the heart of their enemy's power. The cathedral, Naruto gasped as they ran. The elf said there's a hidden archive underneath it. And Julio's ring is the key. They didn't have a plan. They were wounded, exhausted, and hunted. But they had a destination. And they had a sliver of hope. They had to find out what the progenitor was. They had to uncover the truth that Pope Joseph was willing to kill them to protect. The real battle for Hulkigenia had just begun. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Awakening of the Old Gods. The flight through Romalia was a desperate, heart-pounding affair. The holy city, so serene by day, had transformed into a hunter's paradise by night. The tolling of the alarm bells was a constant, oppressive sound, and the streets swarmed with papal guards. Their polished armor gleaming under the cold moonlight. Shouts echoed between the white marble buildings as the net tightened around them. Naruto led the charge, his senses screaming with a constant stream of information. He carried Siesta, whose civilian endurance had quickly given out, her slight weight barely a strain on his stamina. Louise ran beside him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hand held tightly in his. Tabitha brought up the rear, a silent, deadly shadow, her sword a dark line in her hand, her eyes constantly scanning for pursuers. This way, Naruto hissed, pulling them into a narrow, unlit alley between two towering basilicas. He pressed them flat against the cold stone as a patrol of guards marched past the alley's entrance, their spears held at the ready. "We'll never make it to the cathedral," Louise panted, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. "The entire city guard is out. It's a fortress. Every fortress has a back door," Naruto countered, his mind racing. He glanced up. The rooftops. It was always the rooftops. "We go up." He didn't wait for agreement. He formed a single shadow clone. "Get them to the roof," he ordered. The clone nodded, then crouched, lacing its fingers together to form a foothold. "Tabitha, you first," Naruto commanded. Without hesitation, she stepped into the clone's hands and was launched upwards. She twisted in midair, catching the lip of the roof with a grace that defied gravity and pulling herself up. Louise was next. She looked terrified, but a sharp nod from Naruto was all the encouragement she needed. She took a running start and let the clone fling her into the air. Tabitha was there to catch her hand and haul her onto the roof. Finally, Naruto handed the still recovering Siesta up to the clone. "Don't drop her," he grunted. "Wouldn't dream of it, boss," the clone replied, before tossing Siesta up into Tabitha's waiting arms with surprising gentleness. With its mission accomplished, the clone dispersed in a puff of smoke. Naruto took a running start, bounded up the wall, and vaulted onto the roof in a single fluid motion. The view from the rooftops of Romalia was a terrifying spectacle. The entire city was a sea of torches and moving patrols, all converging on the area around their ravaged villa. But up here, on the high, tiled slopes of the city's sacred architecture, they were above the chaos. The spires and domes of the cathedrals formed a complex, shadowy highway leading directly toward their goal, the Grand Cathedral, a monolithic giant of white stone that dominated the skyline. "Stay low, move fast," Naruto whispered, and they began their desperate trek across the roof of the holy city. They moved like ghosts, a four-person team operating on pure instinct. Naruto led, his senses picking out the safest paths, his preternatural agility making the treacherous terrain seem like a flat plain. Tabitha was his second, her movements just as silent, her eyes watching their backs. Louise and Siesta, though less agile, kept up as best they could, their fear eclipsed by grim determination, their trust in Naruto absolute. As they drew closer to the Grand Cathedral, the energy in the air began to change. It was a low, guttural hum that vibrated in Naruto's bones, a thrumming power that had nothing to do with Brimir's elemental magic. It felt ancient, raw, and fundamentally wrong. "Do you feel that?" Louise whispered, her hand tightening on Naruto's. The Gandalfur rune on his skin was cold, a spot of ice against the warmth of her grip. "I do," Naruto said. "It's coming from under the cathedral. Whatever the progenitor is, it's down there. And it's waking up." They reached the edge of the square surrounding the cathedral. It was crawling with the Pope's elite ecliptic guard, Giulio's personal hounds. There was no way to cross the open ground unseen. "Now what, genius?" Louise asked, her voice tight with tension. Naruto pointed towards a massive stained glass window high up on the cathedral's facade, depicting founder Brimir smiting a horde of monstrous beasts. "We go through there." He formed another shadow clone. "Mission. Get Giulio's ring," he ordered. "Create a diversion. Be loud. Don't get caught." The clone grinned, a flash of white teeth in the darkness. "My specialty." It gave a mock salute and then vanished over the side of the roof, a flicker of orange and black descending into the chaos below. Moments later, an explosion rocked the far side of the square. A supply wagon went up in a ball of fire, the result of a well-placed explosive tag Naruto had crafted from scavenged materials. The guards, including Julio, who they could see directing the search, immediately rushed towards the commotion. It was the opening they needed. "Go," Naruto urged. He wrapped an arm around Louise's waist, while Tabitha took hold of Siesta. With a powerful leap, they launched themselves from the roof, soaring across the 50-foot gap towards the cathedral wall. They landed hard against the cold stone, their feet finding purchase on the decorative ledges of the massive window. "Tabitha, give me a boost," Naruto grunted. Sheathing her sword, she braced herself, and Naruto used her shoulders as a springboard, vaulting higher. He drew a kunai and, with a sharp, precise strike, shattered a small pane of glass near the window's latch. He reached through, unhooked the heavy iron lock, and pushed the massive window open. They scrambled inside, landing silently in the cavernous, moonlit interior of the Grand Cathedral just as shouts from below indicated their entry point had been discovered. They were in the main nave. It was a place of breathtaking scale and profound silence. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the marble floor in hues of blue, red, and gold. But the oppressive, ancient energy was stronger here, a palpable presence that seemed to emanate from the very stones. Suddenly, Naruto stumbled, a sharp gasp escaping his lips as the memories of his clone flooded his mind. He saw through its eyes. The diversion, the chaos, Julio's furious face. He saw the clone weaving through the guards, a blur of motion, before making a daring pass at Julio himself. He saw the clone's hand shoot out, not to strike, but to deftly slip the ornate, sigil-etched ring from Julio's finger as he parried a blow. And then he saw the clone, its mission accomplished, allowing itself to be run through by a half-dozen enchanted blades, dispersing into smoke just as the ring was secured. Naruto opened his own hand. Lying in his palm was Julio's ring. Cold, heavy, and humming with a strange energy. "He got it," he breathed, a grim smile on his face. "The crazy bastard actually did it." "Naruto." Tabitha's sharp voice cut through the moment. She was pointing towards the grand altar at the far end of the nave. A section of the floor, a large circular dais inscribed with complex runes, was glowing with the same faint, sickly light as the humming energy they felt. "The archive," Louise whispered. They ran to the dais. At its center was a small keyhole. It was a perfect match for the design on Julio's ring. Naruto inserted the ring into the lock and turned. There was a deep grinding sound, like the world shifting on its axis. The entire dais began to descend, revealing itself to be a massive stone platform. It lowered them into a vast, dark chamber below the cathedral. The air grew cold, thick with the smell of dust and something else, something ancient and organic, like a primeval forest sealed away for millennia. The platform came to a stop in a colossal, circular room. The walls were not stone, but a strange, dark, crystalline material, and they were covered in glowing runes that pulsed in time with the low hum that now enveloped them. In the center of the chamber stood a pillar of pure, black, obsidian-like material, stretching from the floor to the impossibly high ceiling. The humming was loudest here, and the pillar seemed to absorb all light. A column of absolute nothingness. "This isn't an archive," Louise said, her voice trembling in awe and terror. "This is a cage, and whatever's inside," Naruto added, his hand resting on the hilt of a kunai, "is what the Pope wants to let out." As if in answer, a voice echoed through the chamber, dripping with self-satisfied amusement. Precisely. Pope Joseph stood at the far end of the chamber, flanked by Julio and a dozen ecliptic guards. He hadn't bothered to chase them through the city. He had been waiting for them here. "Welcome, my children," the Pope said, his grandfatherly smile firmly in place, a grotesque contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the chamber. "I am so glad you could join me for this historic moment. Thank you for bringing the key." "It's over, old man," Naruto growled. "We know what you're planning." "Do you?" The Pope chuckled. "I doubt you could even begin to comprehend it. You see this pillar? This is the locus of Brimir's seal. The final lock on a prison of his own making. For 10,000 years, it has held the world in stasis, shackling mankind to the crude elements. But the seal has weakened. The wars, the bloodshed, the negative energy I have so carefully cultivated for the last 50 years, it has all been a grand ritual to corrode the bars of this cage." He spread his arms wide, his eyes shining with fanatical light. Tonight, the final ritual will be completed. The chaos you have brought to my holy city is the last ingredient. And the power of the void, my dear Louise, will be the hammer that shatters the lock forever. Suddenly, the entire chamber began to shake violently. The runes on the walls flared, their light shifting from a steady hum to a frantic, screaming pulse. All across the continent, an ancient network of ley lines, dormant for millennia, blazed to life. In the forests of Tristan, the ground split open and a colossal, insectoid creature made of living wood and stone, a grove behemoth, clawed its way to the surface. Its roar shaking the very leaves from the trees. On the plains of Gallia, a herd of titanic, six-legged beasts with hides of shimmering metal, creatures of living ore, rose from the earth. Their stampede threatening to flatten entire towns. From the coastal waters of Albion, a kraken of immense size, its tentacles wreathed in storm clouds, began to crawl onto the land. Its mere presence causing the sea to boil. The old gods, the pre-Brimir monstrosities he had defeated and sealed away, were awakening. It was an apocalypse. Naruto felt it, even deep beneath the earth. A surge of chaotic, terrifying life energy flaring up all over the continent. He felt the terror of the people, the screaming, the dying. The awakening of these beasts wasn't the Pope's goal. It was a side effect. A symptom of the seal breaking. "You're insane," Louise screamed at the Pope. "You'll destroy the world." "No, my child," the Pope said, his voice filled with ecstatic fervor. "I am liberating it. These beasts are but the death throes of Brimir's dying world. From their ashes, the progenitor will rise and remake it anew, in a purer, truer form." He gave a sharp nod to Julio. "Begin the final phase. The heroes of Tristan will serve as the final sacrifice. Their life energy will power the awakening." The Ecliptic Guard advanced, their black swords hissing. But Naruto and his companions were no longer just running. They were fighting. "Louise, Tabitha, buy me time," Naruto yelled, his mind racing. "Siesta, stay behind me." He wasn't thinking about the guards. He was thinking about the continent. The people dying. He was a hero, wasn't he? What was the point of a hero if he couldn't save anyone? He had to stop this. Not just here, in this room, but out there. He formed 1,000 shadow clones. A veritable army erupted in the chamber, instantly overwhelming the Ecliptic Guard in a tide of orange and black. "Go," he roared to his copies. "Spread out. Help who you can. Evacuate the towns. Distract the beasts. Do something." The clones didn't hesitate. They didn't use the descending platform. They simply ran up the crystalline walls of the chamber and vanished into the cathedral above. An army of saviors unleashed upon a dying world. It was a massive drain on his chakra, a gamble that left him with precious little to fight the real battle, but it was a choice he had to make. Hope Joseph watched the display with a curious, almost academic interest. "Fascinating. You can project your will across the globe. You truly are a force of nature. A beautiful, dying star." While the few remaining clones engaged Julio and his elite guard, Naruto turned his attention to the true problem, the pillar. He had to stop the seal from breaking. He placed his hand on it. A jolt of unimaginable energy, both creative and destructive, surged through him. It was the raw chaos of the progenitor. It would have vaporized any other man. But in Naruto, it met the coiled, disciplined energy of his own chakra. And the calm, steady anchor of the natural energy he had only just begun to understand in this new world. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos of the battle raging around him. He shut out the screams from across the continent. He reached deep inside himself, past the chakra, past the Gandalfur rune, to the very core of his being. He remembered the stillness of the forest in Tarbes, the feel of the sun on his face, the rustle of the leaves. This world had a life force, a natural energy, just like his own had. He had touched it before, instinctively. Now, he would seize it. He drew it in. The natural energy of Halkygenia, a world teeming with magic and life, poured into him. It was purer, wilder, more potent than the energy of his home world. Orange pigment exploded around his eyes. The markings of a toad sage appearing on his face, but they were sharper, more defined. His pupils dilated, becoming horizontal bars. His entire presence changed, radiating an aura of immense, elemental power. He had entered sage mode. The world snapped into focus with a clarity that was almost painful. He could feel everything. He could feel the life force of Louise, Tabitha, and Siesta burning brightly behind him. He could feel the cold, fanatical ambition of the Pope. And he could feel the monstrous, alien consciousness of the progenitor, stirring in its prison. He opened his eyes. "All right, you old bastard," he said, his voice a low, rumbling harmony of his own and the world's. "Let's see if your grand plan can survive a recentrican." He created 2 shadow clones beside him. They began to form the attack, but it was different now. The natural energy he was absorbing poured into the jutsu, making it larger, more stable, more powerful than ever before. A miniature, screaming hurricane of wind and natural energy spun between his hands, a star of destructive power. Julio, having finally dispatched the last of Naruto's clones, saw the attack form. And his eyes widened in genuine terror. "Your Holiness, we must." "It's beautiful," the Pope whispered, his face alight with wonder. Such magnificent, chaotic power. A fitting tribute to the progenitor's awakening. Naruto didn't wait. He pulled his arm back and hurled the sage art, recentrican. It flew across the chamber, not at the Pope, but at the black, obsidian pillar. He wasn't going to try and patch the seal. He was going to reinforce it with his own power. The recentrican struck the pillar. The expected explosion didn't happen. Instead, the screaming shuriken of wind and sage chakra began to sink into the black surface, injecting its energy directly into the seal's matrix. The pillar flared with a brilliant white light, and the frantic, screaming runes on the walls stabilized, their light becoming a steady, powerful glow. The deep, guttural hum of the awakening progenitor was silenced, replaced by the high-pitched whine of the recentrican's power fortifying the ancient prison. Across the continent, the effect was instantaneous. The grove behemoth in Tristan froze, its wooden limbs becoming stiff and lifeless before it slowly began to sink back into the earth. Metallic herd in Gallia collapsed as if their strings had been cut. The kraken in Albion let out a final, mournful cry and dissolved into a torrent of seafoam. Naruto's clones, scattered across the land, guided the terrified populaces. Their appearance a sign of hope amidst the chaos. A legend was born in a single night. Back in the chamber, the Pope stared at the now glowing white pillar, his face a mask of disbelief. No, it's not possible. You've reinforced the seal. You've set my work back a century. Naruto, still glowing with the power of sage mode, stood tall. Your work, he said, his voice resonating with power. You call this destruction work. You're just a crazy old man who wants to burn the world down because you didn't like the rules. For the first time, Pope Joseph's grandfatherly mask shattered completely, revealing the face of pure, unadulterated fury. You insignificant, interfering little gnat, he shrieked, his voice losing its calm resonance. You have delayed the dawn. But you will not stop it. The seal is still damaged. The progenitor has been stirred. The new age will still come. He made a gesture, and the floor beneath him and his guards began to glow. A teleportation circle. This is not over, Gandalfer. The next time we meet, I will not be here to welcome you. I will be here to unmake you. With a flash of light, they were gone. The chamber fell silent. The pillar of the seal glowed with a steady, white light, the power of Naruto's recentrican now a permanent part of the ancient ward. The apocalypse had been averted. The power of sage mode receded, leaving Naruto panting, the immense strain of the feat finally hitting him. He stumbled, and Louise and Siesta were there to catch him, supporting his weight. Tabitha stood before them, her sword held ready. A vigilant guardian. You did it, Louise whispered, her voice filled with a reverence that went beyond anything she had felt before. Naruto, you saved everything. He looked at them, at his small, strange, fiercely loyal family. He had been torn from his home, but here, in a cold, dark chamber beneath a city that wanted him dead, he had found his purpose. He was a protector. This was his home now. And he would not let anyone, not a mad pope or an ancient, sleeping god, threaten it. He pushed himself upright, his strength slowly returning. It's not over, he said, his voice grim. He's still out there. And he's right. The seal is still broken. He could feel it. The progenitor was quiet, but it was awake. And it was waiting. Let him come. Naruto said, a hard, determined glint in his eye as he looked at the faces of the women he would die for. We'll be waiting for him. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Heir of the Void, Son of Man. The escape from Romalia was not a frantic flight, but a grim, strategic withdrawal. The Pope was gone, the city's leadership was in disarray, and Naruto's clones were causing chaos on a continental scale. They walked out of the Rand Cathedral's main doors into a dawn-streaked city still reeling from the night's events. The papal guards, faced with a man who could supposedly be everywhere at once, gave them a wide, fearful berth. The legend of the Golden Ghost had transformed from a soldier's tale into a divine proclamation. Their journey back to Tristan was a somber affair. The world they traveled through was scarred. He aborted awakening of the old gods had left deep wounds on the land and its people. They saw the colossal furrows where the grove behemoth had clawed its way free, entire forests uprooted. They passed villages flattened by the stampede of the ore beasts. They heard tales of coastal towns nearly washed away by the Kraken's fury. The apocalypse had been averted, but its shadow lingered, a stark reminder of the stakes. Naruto's clones had done more than just fight. They had become a global relief force. They helped rebuild homes, clear roads, and guide refugees. They told tales of their boss, the hero who had stood against the darkness. By the time Naruto and his family crossed the border back into Tristan, he wasn't just a hero, he was a symbol of hope, a figure of salvation for the common folk whose faith in the Church of Brimir had been profoundly shaken. Princess Henrietta met them not in a formal court, but at the gates of the capital, her expression a mixture of relief and grave concern. The news from Romalia, a garbled mess of assassination attempts, heretical cults, and divine interventions, had thrown the entire political landscape of Halkygenia into chaos. The authority of the Pope was shattered. His disappearance, coupled with the worldwide devastation, had created a power vacuum. The world is on a knife's edge, Henrietta said, walking with them through the halls of the palace. Gallia is in turmoil. The Germanian emperor is demanding answers. We are on the brink of a continental war, or worse, a holy war between factions of the church. The Pope will be back, Naruto stated, his voice flat. And he won't be trying to win a political battle next time. He'll be trying to end the world. He explained everything. The progenitor, Brimir's seal, the Pope's true goal. He laid the terrifying truth bare in the war room of the Tristanian palace. The ministers and generals listened, their faces growing paler with every word. The myths they had built their world upon were a lie. Their god was a jailer, and their church's leader was trying to set the prisoner free. In the days that followed, a fragile alliance was formed. Tristan, led by Henrietta, became the center of the resistance. Gallia, with Tabitha now accepting her heritage and speaking with a newfound authority as the Chevalier in exile, pledged its support. Emissaries were sent to Germania and the elves, carrying the truth of Romalia's heresy. The world was choosing sides. Their home base was the Valier Uzumaki suite in the palace, now expanded into a full command center. Maps covered the walls, dotted with markers indicating ley line concentrations and reports of strange, localized reality distortions. The weakened seal was causing the fabric of their world to fray at the edges. They worked relentlessly. Naruto, using his sage mode for short, controlled bursts, could sense the flow of natural energy across the continent, tracking the Pope's movements like a hound on a scent. Louise, no longer the Zero but the recognized heir of the Void, devoured ancient texts, trying to understand the power she wielded, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Tabitha, her tactical mind unparalleled, coordinated intelligence from Naruto's clones and from Gallian spies, predicting the Pope's next move. And Siesta, the heart of their operation, kept them grounded, ensuring they ate, slept, and remembered they were human. Not just pieces in a world-ending chess game. Their bond, forged in fire and fealty, deepened into something unbreakable. They were a family, fighting for their home. The unspoken love between them was a quiet, powerful force, a silent vow that they would face the end of the world together. 2 weeks after their return, Naruto's senses flared. He's there, he said, his voice dropping, silencing the room. He pointed to the map. Romalia, he's returned. The energy, it's building. He's going to make his final move. The sky above Romalia confirmed his words. A storm that was not a storm began to gather. The clouds roiled with colors that had no name, and a crackle of raw, uncreation energy filled the air. A vortex, a wound in reality, began to open directly above the Grand Cathedral. There was no time for armies. There was no time for political maneuvering. This was a battle that could only be fought by the ones who started it. "It's time," Naruto said, looking at the three women who were his world. Louise met his gaze, her violet eyes clear and fearless. "We're ready." Tabitha drew her sword, the hiss of steel a quiet promise. Siesta, her hands trembling but her expression resolute, handed Naruto his orange coat. "Come back safe," she whispered, her role not on the battlefield, but as the anchor they would return to. They didn't take a carriage. Tabitha's dragon, Sylphid, now grown larger and stronger from the ambient magic, carried them. They flew through the day and the night, a desperate, high-speed race against the apocalypse. As they approached Romalia, the sky grew darker, the air thick with a pressure that squeezed the lungs. The vortex was a terrifying spectacle, a maelstrom of chaotic power threatening to swallow the sky. At its epicenter, floating in the air above the cathedral's highest spire, was Pope Joseph. He was no longer the kindly old man or the shrieking fanatic. He was something else. He had absorbed a sliver of the progenitor's raw essence, a single drop from the ocean of its power. His body pulsed with a dark, divine light, his simple white robe replaced by an armor of solidified shadow and fractured light. His eyes were black voids, and his voice, when he spoke, was not one man's, but a legion's. "You are too late, children of the jailer," his voice boomed, a sound that was both heard and felt. "The progenitor's dawn is at hand. This world will be unmade and born anew in its glorious, chaotic image." This was it, the final boss, a man who had touched godhood and gone mad. "Louise, the vortex is your target," Naruto yelled over the roaring wind. "Your void is the only thing that can affect it. Tabitha, you're with me. We need to keep him occupied." They landed on the roof of the Grand Cathedral, a flat, sprawling arena under a sky being torn apart. The battle began instantly. Naruto, his face already marked with the orange pigment of Sage Mode, charged. He was a blur of motion, his every strike infused with the power of nature. Aimed not to kill, but to test, to find a weakness in the Pope's new form. He moved like a dancer, his taijutsu a fluid, unpredictable storm of kicks and punches. The Pope didn't even flinch. He raised a hand, and a wave of pure, gravitational force erupted, slamming into Naruto and sending him skidding back across the stone roof. "Your power is that of the world, Gandalfer. I am now beyond the world." Tabitha unleashed a barrage of spells. Ice spears the size of trees, wind scythes that screamed through the air, explosive runes that detonated with concussive force. They were spells that could have leveled a castle. They splashed against the Pope's shadowy armor and dissipated like raindrops. "The magic of the four elements is Brimir's cage," the Pope's chorus voice intoned. "It has no power over the one who holds the key." While they engaged the Pope, Louise stood at the edge of the roof, her face turned up to the horrifying vortex. She closed her eyes, shutting out the chaos of the battle. She reached into the emptiness inside her, the void she had feared for so long. But it was no longer a terrifying, hungry thing. It was a part of her. Naruto had shown her that any power, even one this absolute, could be controlled. It was a tool. She raised her wand. The Gandalfer rune on Naruto's hand flared, and through their bond, he poured his own chakra, his own will, into her. A lifeline, an anchor. "I am Louise Françoise Leblanc de Lavalière, heir of the void," she declared, her voice ringing with a power that cut through the storm. She began to chant, not a spell from a book, but a litany of pure intent, shaping the void with her will. The fight against the Pope was brutal. He was overwhelmingly powerful, his every gesture warping reality around them. He would point, and the stone beneath Naruto's feet would turn to a grasping, muddy liquid. He would gesture, and the air around Tabitha would ignite. They fought with a synergy born of 100 battles, real and imagined. Naruto would create a shadow clone to draw the Pope's attention, and Tabitha would use the opening to launch a perfectly aimed spell, not at the Pope himself, but at the ground beneath him. Trying to throw him off balance. Naruto would engage him in close combat, his sage-enhanced senses allowing him to dodge attacks that moved faster than sight, while Tabitha's deaf Ensive wards would intercept blasts of energy aimed at Naruto's back. They were a dance of distraction and precision, chipping away at an enemy who seemed invincible. "You cannot win," the Pope roared, growing frustrated with their tenacity. He unleashed a wave of dark energy that threw them both back. "Your struggles are meaningless." He was about to press his advantage when a beam of pure, NTRATED nothingness shot up from the edge of the roof and struck the vortex. It was not an explosion. It was a deletion. A perfect, circular hole appeared in the swirling chaos, a patch of calm, clear night sky visible for a moment before the vortex violently sealed the wound. The Pope staggered, a flicker of pain crossing his face. No, the heir dares to mend the wound. He had made his mistake. He had turned his attention to Louise. In that split second, Naruto acted. He had been gathering natural energy, not for a single, massive attack, but for speed. He blurred across the rooftop, appearing directly in front of the Pope. He wasn't aiming to strike. He was aiming to hold. He grabbed the Pope's arms, his hands sizzling as they made contact with the divine armor. His Sage Mode chakra flared, not as an attack, but as a binding agent, his natural energy warring against the Pope's uncreation energy. "Tabitha, Louise, now," he roared, his muscles straining, his body screaming in protest. As the Pope's power threatened to tear him apart, Tabitha understood. She began to chant her most powerful spell, a complex Galleon ward designed to bind and contain magical entities. A cage of glowing blue chains erupted from the ground, wrapping around the struggling Pope, reinforcing Naruto's hold. Louise saw her chance. This was it, her final exam. She poured every last ounce of her will, her love for her family, her hope for the world, into one ultimate spell. She wasn't trying to close the vortex. She was going to sever it. She raised her wand and screamed a single word, a word of power that was her own creation. World door. But she didn't open a portal. She weaponized the concept. A shimmering, transparent rift, the very edge of a gateway between worlds, appeared in the sky. It was thin as a razor's edge and impossibly sharp. With a final, desperate cry, she swung her arm down, and the dimensional blade sliced through the base of the vortex, cleanly severing its connection to their plane of existence. The vortex, cut off from its anchor, unraveled with a deafening implosion of silent thunder. The unnatural colors vanished, the storm dissipated, and the calm, star-filled night sky was restored. The Pope screamed, a sound of pure agony as his borrowed power, his connection to the progenitor, was severed. The armor of shadow and light shattered, flaking away like ash. His body, unable to contain the dregs of the divine energy, began to break apart. Naruto, his Sage Mode fading, held on, pinning the disintegrating man in place. He looked into Pope Joseph's eyes, which were no longer black voids but the eyes of a terrified, dying old man. You have doomed us all," Joseph rasped, his body crumbling. "The progenitor is awake, its prison is weak. One day, it will break free, and I won't be here to guide it." With a final, whispering sigh, he dissolved into a cloud of black dust, which the wind scattered into the night. Silence. The war was over. The Pope was gone. The world was saved. Naruto collapsed to his knees, his body spent. Tabitha stood over him, her sword lowered, a vigilant sentinel. Louise, her own strength failing, stumbled across the rooftop and fell into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent. They were alive. They were together. The aftermath was a new beginning. The Church of Brimir, its leadership exposed as heretical, fractured. The old monarchies, their authority shaken, were forced to reckon with a new power, the will of the people, who now saw their saviors not in kings or popes, but in the heroes who had fought for them. A new council was formed in Tristan, with Princess Henrietta at its head, to guide Halkygenia into a new age. It was a council not just of nobles, but of scholars, merchants, and commoners. And its most powerful, most respected members were the leaders of the newly christened House of Valier Uzumaki. The story ends months later, on a sun-drenched balcony of the Valier estate in Tristan. A place Louise had not seen since she was a child. The land was healing. The world was rebuilding. Naruto stood looking out over the green, rolling hills, a gentle breeze rustling his hair. Louise stood beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand intertwined with his. On his other side, Tabitha leaned against the balustrade, her book open but her eyes on the horizon. Siesta came out onto the balcony, carrying a tray of iced tea, her smile as warm and bright as the sun. Their family was whole, their home was safe. The Gandalfur rune on Naruto's hand was no longer a symbol of his bondage, but a reminder of the bond he had forged with the woman he loved. He was the Gandalfur of the Void, but he was also Naruto Uzumaki, son of man, husband, and protector. The threat of the progenitor was still there, a sleeping titan in a weakened prison. Their future would hold more battles, more challenges. But for now, there was peace. There was love. There was home. He looked at the three incredible women by his side, the cornerstones of his new life, and a genuine, heartfelt smile spread across his face. He was a long way from the boy who had grown up an orphan in a village called Konoha. But for the first time in 2 lives, he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 7 End.